Episode 541. We've won today.
Mr. Giant Crocodile, why are you with them?
Jonas still had some expectations inside. He stared at Giant Crocodile, but Giant Crocodile wasn't in the mood to care about him at all. Upon hearing this, Frank completely collapsed. He took an involuntary step back, almost sitting on the ground. Michael didn't even spare him a glance. The White family and the Underground Alliance. He didn't want to care about them right now. He just looked in a panic at Bessy and held her face in his hands.
Can we please go?
Bessy also wanted to settle the White family affairs. She just looked at Michael now. He had always been noble and self-sufficient, and no matter what kind of matters he encountered, it wouldn't affect the way he placed himself above the common populace. But now, he was nervous and at a loss. Bessy stared at him for a long time before saying helplessly, "Okay, I'll come with you. Don't worry." Michael's fingers were unstable as he buttoned Bessy's coat for her. He hurried away with her. After they left, both Jonas and Frank were taken aback. Frank had always been known as a wolf in sheep's clothing, but at this time, he couldn't even laugh. He just stared at Alexander unwillingly as he held on to him.
How did you convince Giant Crocodile?
Unwilling and reluctant, Jonas couldn't think of how Giant Crocodile was on their side. He had obviously been the first to contact Giant Crocodile through Sherry. Alexander looked at him with complicated eyes and said with slight sympathy,
Do you know who Giant Crocodile's brother, Lone Wolf, is?
Lone Wolf? Jonas looked up, and his lips twitched.
Who?
Bessy, Alexander said lightly. Boom. Jonah's eyes turned listless, and he was in a state of shock. No one knew that while the night seemed peaceful, half the sky had fallen in Evanston. Not far away, Harvey and Patrick were still dealing with the rest of the group. Staring at Bessy's back, Terry let out a sigh of relief.
No wonder I always felt like Miss Miller was very strange. It turned out that the most powerful person in the Underground Alliance was her.
Giant Crocodile and Terry had always been hostile, but now he didn't have the time to deal with that. He could only ask Christopher in subpar English.
Did they just say she has a virus in her body?
Christopher's complexion wasn't very good as he shook his head.
I'm not sure what the situation is. Boss and the others should be at the Medical Research Institute by now.
Daniel was at the Medical Research Institute.
Thanks.
Giant Crocodile didn't say much else. After getting his answer, he immediately turned and left. He headed for the Medical Research Institute. Christopher stopped in place. He also wanted to check Bessy's situation, but they had to finish here. Thoughts flashed in his mind, and it was a long time before his head suddenly jerked up.
No. What's wrong?
Now that Harvey had captured everyone, he walked over after hearing him.
We've won a complete victory today. It was easier than I thought.
Episode 542. This wasn't a simple project.
Easy?
Patrick also felt like something was wrong upon hearing Harvey. Among the 5 brothers, Christopher and Patrick were both military divisions of Michael, and both were close to him in terms of strategy and other aspects.
Don't forget why the Underground Alliance remained silent for 2 years and only recently came back,
said Christopher as he looked at the people around him. Having traveled around Austria, he already knew the situation there very well. It turned out that the Underground Alliance had civil unrest. And then, there was the news of the deputy leader, who had been sitting firmly in 3rd place. But Bessy wasn't dead, which meant she had faked her death back then. According to Christopher's understanding of Bessy, something must have happened inside the Underground Alliance at the time. It had probably been a rebellion or something. Otherwise, the Underground Alliance wouldn't split. With her means, it would be impossible to find her if she wanted to hide. She had only stepped out now because of the White family and the civil strife in Evanston. Exchanging glances, Christopher and Patrick thought of a possibility.
Someone set up a situation to force Miss Miller to come forward.
Patrick clenched his fists.
We can think on the bright side. Understandably, they set Miss Miller up, but there's no need to spend so much effort on the White family.
Shaking his head, Christopher turned to look sideways at Terry.
Terry, how did you stop Alejandro?
Giant Crocodile stopped him at the border airport. It didn't take much effort. Although Terry was reckless, he still had some brains. Hence, he also felt like something was wrong upon hearing Christopher's words. Even Michael feared Alejandro. So how could Giant Crocodile stop him so easily? It was impossible, even with Johann's help.
Patrick, we must plan for the worst. I'm afraid that there's a bigger conspiracy behind this incident,
said Terry. Thinking of Michael's instructions, Christopher pushed his glasses and narrowed his eyes.
Even with Giant Crocodile and the others, we can't lower our guards.
He lowered his head and whispered something to Terry. After listening, Terry glanced at him in surprise. At the Medical Research Institute, a stranger walked in.
Sorry, sir.
Several guards stopped the stranger. Giant Crocodile. Giant Crocodile neither looked at him nor stopped. The man beside him grabbed the guard with a smile and pressed the door switch. He entered a few string of codes on the computer, found Daniel's laboratory, then threw the magnetic card to Giant Crocodile.
Boss, West Building, B502.
Giant Crocodile entered. The guard's eyes widened in horror.
Brother, don't worry. Our boss just wants to see Dr. Brown.
When Giant Crocodile's subordinate watched his figure disappear, he released the guard, patted his sleeves, and smiled in comfort. After Giant Crocodile and the men left, the guards exchanged glances.
Santana, should I call the police? Those men don't look normal. Michael just went to find Mr. Brown.
No need. Santana looked at the group of people with dreadful eyes.
Just pretend you didn't see this today. I'm afraid Evanston really isn't peaceful anymore.
The other guard also nodded.
The gods are fighting, so we mortals should leave them alone and pretend we didn't see anything.
Several people agreed. Inside Daniel's laboratory, Bessy leaned on the experimental instrument and held an electronic tester in her hand.
What kind of broken machine is this?
Daniel violently kicked the machine. Michael had told him about Bessy 2 days earlier. Bessy's blood was indeed abnormal.
I've already analyzed Bessy's blood you gave me yesterday. 10 cases were investigated in the hospital's large database. We're still collecting data from the other hospitals. It's very similar to the upgraded version of the virus in Joshua's body. This kind of virus is very similar to the unknown Y3 virus.
Daniel frowned.
There shouldn't have been a large-scale spread. Brother, you'll have to control the flow of people in Evanston before the results come out.
During the past 2 days of non-stop research in the laboratory, Daniel had solved the nucleic acid molecules, but still hadn't figured out about the protein structure. He had temporarily named it the Y3 virus. The database was too big. At first, Daniel had studied Bertha by himself for a long time and had only successfully researched it with Michael's help. With only 2 days left now, Daniel hadn't even had time to observe a lab rat. Viruses in medicine would only be suppressed and not completely destroyed. It was more terrifying and thrilling than the Ebola virus. This wasn't a simple project. Episode 543. Don't spread the news of the Y3 virus.
Okay.
Michael glanced in Bessy's direction through the glass and said lightly,
I'll make the order.
Daniel frowned.
How on earth did this spread?
He pursed his lips and glanced at Bessy, who was holding the instrument in one hand and indifferently playing with her phone in the other.
She knows? Yeah.
Without looking up, Michael's voice sounded as calm as ever.
Give me Mr. White's death certificate.
Retracting his gaze, he took the test tube and calmly looked at the jumping data. A thick virology book was placed on the side.
Is the situation very complicated?
Giant Crocodile appeared silently behind them.
Do you need my help?
Daniel was startled by Giant Crocodile's sudden appearance. B502 had various infrared rays and mechanisms designed for him by Bessy, and most people had to get Daniel's consent to enter. So how did this person swing by so silently?
Xander.
Giant Crocodile glanced at him and pointed outside.
That's my family outside.
He was Bessy's friend. Since Bessy had many weird friends, Daniel put aside his doubts for now. Anyways, she had personally designed this mechanism herself. Seeing that Michael wasn't surprised to see him, Daniel didn't hold back from him.
You have men under you?
Giant Crocodile nodded.
Okay, help me stabilize the research institute.
Daniel took a report and walked over to him.
Give me 2 men. I want to hold an emergency meeting. Lynn, follow him.
Giant Crocodile tilted his head towards Lynn. Lynn waved to him.
Mr. Brown, I'm Lynn. Please give me any orders.
Daniel raised an eyebrow. Based on Lynn's aura, it was obvious that he wasn't an ordinary person. However, the virus was more important now, so Daniel didn't bother with these people. At the Medical Research Institute's emergency meeting, Daniel's fame had spread far and wide internationally, and he even had the Clark family behind him. His status in the Medical Research Institute was high, and most people had heard of his name without seeing him in person. At the meeting he held, almost every researcher and person in charge of the Medical Research Institute came. Evanston hadn't been peaceful recently. The Medical Research Institute and the Clark family weren't having a good time, but they were still faring better than the White family. Large families like the Clark family had a lot of inside information. Because the White family had invested too much in Austria previously, they were almost desperate now, and their foundation had been shaken. The Clark family was, hence, not as unsteady as the White family. At most, they were unsteady because of Rosemary's internal fight with Aaron, and because the Pete family was eyeing them covetously. Compared to the Shaky Flake family and the Headless White family, both the Clark and Miller families were relatively stable. Most of the people in charge of the Medical Research Institute were members of the Clark family. They all came to Daniel's emergency meeting. Standing at the forefront, Daniel placed his hands on the table.
Form 2 groups.
Dr. Ambrose Clark, the dean of the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, looked at the report and started to panic when he realized the importance of this matter.
Mr. Brown, I'll notify the major hospitals to isolate their patients.
People all over the world had been talking of an unknown virus discoloration. A long time ago, an expert said that if the virus in some laboratories was taken out, it could wipe out humans several times over. Compared to his unknown virus, the struggle between the 4 major families was really nothing.
Don't spread the news of the Y3 virus.
They were afraid of mass panic that would make the situation even more uncontrollable.
We know.
Dr. Clark solemnly looked at Daniel.
But we haven't been able to figure out the virus's protein molecules. We've contacted the medical organization about it.
Daniel looked around and continued.
The entire laboratory is researching the Y3 virus. We need to provide virus samples and information. Dean Clark, bring a group of people to continue this.
Episode 544. Stay here. Leave the rest to me. Medical organizations were the most authoritative places in the medical world. No matter what, everyone would rest assured as long as the medical organization was involved. People in the office now felt a roller coaster of emotions. Their hearts had fallen to the bottom of a valley at the mention of the Y3 virus just now. But after hearing that the medical organization had taken action, their moods once again rose. The medical organization actually stepped in to help. The people in the conference room held up the materials. This matter is good for the Research Institute and the Clark family in all aspects. Go and report it to Mr. and Miss Clark. The Medical Research Institute belonged to the Clark family, so this kind of important matter must be discussed with Rosemary and the others so that the news could be kept under control. The lights in the laboratory were turned on overnight. Daniel was contacting the medical organization while Michael was observing big data and conducting various studies. A piece of glass separated Bessy and Michael. At this time, she was calling Zeke, her voice as calm as ever. Arrange for someone to pick up Tucker as soon as possible.
Tucker?
Tucker was still studying abroad with Brandon, but Bessy must have her reasons for saying this. Since she didn't say much, Zeke didn't ask too much either.
Okay, I'll make the preparations.
She hung up the phone and sighed in relief before leaning back. She reached out and squeezed her throat.
Why aren't you sleeping?
Michael came in with a blanket. His thin and cool eyebrows turned much gentler after seeing her. I can't sleep, Bessy said indifferently. Her sleep quality had always been poor. Michael knew this. Glancing at her tight neck and worried face, he couldn't help but pause. His long eyelashes hung down as he reached out to touch her face. But Bessy avoided it. I heard it all. Bessy sighed. She took the blanket from Michael's hand and wrapped herself in it. The Y3 virus. Aren't you afraid of death? Bessy had been unscrupulous when she had been unaware of this previously. But now, she was afraid. She didn't study medicine, but her biology wasn't bad. She knew how terrifying and threatening this virus was, to be worse than Ebola. Daniel hadn't worked out how this virus was transmitted yet. Bessy, who had always been fearless, was now afraid that something would happen to Michael. Upon hearing this, Michael's calm eyes gradually deepened, and his hands trembled. He reached out and grabbed Bessy's collar without saying anything. Then he lowered his head fiercely and slowly slid his palms beneath the blankets to intertwine his fingers with hers. Bessy didn't have time to react before she felt the thin and hot air beside her, and his clear, hot breath on her face. Michael had always been gentle and elegant, but his actions at this moment were willfully tough.
Stay here. Leave the rest to me.
Michael got up and unbuttoned his top button. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing a thin section of his wrist.
My dad gave this information to me back then,
he said. Daniel, who was concentrating on studying the virus, was completely unaware of what had happened outside the glass. He only tilted his head when he heard the sound.
Joshua's information. All right.
Daniel had stayed there for more than a year to study Joshua's condition. Turning around, he found a copy of Joshua's document from the computer and printed it out.
Why did you suddenly think of him?
Daniel had studied for a whole year and had a lot of information. There were 50 pages in total. The two waited for him to slowly print it all out. Michael took the printed materials and looked through them, one by one. Daniel knew what Michael was thinking immediately.
You're suspecting...
Michael remained silent and focused on Joshua's condition. He read all 50 pages in less than 5 minutes. At the same time, Daniel looked at the two's conditions.
Bessy also has insomnia.
After reading, Daniel discovered shocking facts.
She has mild mania and emotional instability. I always thought that her poor sleep was a family genetic disease.
Episode 545. It won't be easy to snatch him from me. Comparing her condition with Joshua, he found several overlaps. The most important one was the need to be suppressed with the daylily. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine after reading it.
Brother, how did you think that your dad and her? They both use the daylily.
The paper in Michael's hands gradually changed shape. But it still wasn't right. Bessy behaved differently from Mr. White and Mr. Clark. Otherwise, Michael wouldn't have seen it and done nothing for so long. As if thinking about what Daniel would do next, Michael raised his head and said calmly,
The virus in her body wasn't fully activated before. It existed, just like the billions of other cells in her body, and only affected her sleep. It was activated only recently because of the White family.
This theory made perfect sense. Daniel suddenly lowered his head. At the thought of how Michael had asked him for Mr. White's death certificate just now, he hurriedly pulled it out from a pile of documents and scanned through it. He had never doubted Mr. White's death. When Mr. White died, he had also been there to witness Bessy's self-blame and pain. No one knew better than Daniel how affectionate and righteous Bessy was. But now, Michael sneered.
Mr. White knew that he had the virus. He was so anxious to spread it to Austria to escape the destiny of being under the control of others.
But what he shouldn't have done was die all alone and reveal things to Bessy before his death. Perhaps Mr. White valued Bessy's potential and wanted her to repay him with guilt so that she would protect the White family from future turbulence. Or maybe it was really for Bessy's sake and he wanted to inspire her with his own death. Michael choked. His eyes turned deep and cold. He had always thought that, at least before the age of 16, Bessy lived with Scarlett, Brian, and Luke, whom he had never seen. She could be chic and carefree. Michael closed his eyes. Having lived under everyone's scheming ways, he was already accustomed to it. He didn't really care, but now that it was Bessy,
I remember that she was different from other people since the beginning.
Daniel muttered. He couldn't help but turn to look at Bessy outside. His heart was bitter and cold. Back in Chicago, he always worried about Bessy's state.
Who started scheming against her since birth?
The daylily. Daniel took a deep breath. It wasn't the time to check this now. He looked up at Michael and said,
The most important thing at the moment is to find someone who grows the daylily. Since it can alleviate your father and Bessy's illness, we can definitely find what we want from it. Brother, this might be the only way to break through. Can you find someone? Don't tell her about this. Just leave it to me.
Michael took his phone and called Marvin. Because of Bessy, Marvin and Mary's father had been responsible for the daylily. The two had even worked out a garden of them. After finding Marvin, he called Christopher and indifferently instructed a few things. At this time, Marvin followed his brothers around without a goal. When he saw the cool and methodical arrangements of his brothers, he felt a little disappointed, but he hid his inner disappointment and followed Patrick to arrange the blockage of all entrances and exits in Evanston. His phone suddenly rang. It was Michael. On the other end, Michael gave some instructions. Suddenly energetic, Marvin turned to Patrick.
Brother, I can't help you anymore.
While talking on the phone, Patrick glanced at him and raised an eyebrow in surprise.
What are you doing? I'm going to the hospital and research institute to help Michael.
Marvin puffed out his chest and took his phone to contact Mr. Smith. Behind him, Alexander took out a cigarette.
He can even go to the research institute to help, boss.
Was he kidding? At 3 a.m. on the dark streets of Evanston, A woman carrying a camera had a strong and healthy figure. Stepping on the back of a man whose face couldn't be seen, she laughed lazily. She pressed the headset in her ear. "Jared, I've caught him. Some people will come to the second street to bring him back. Hurry up." Jared hadn't slept a wink. He tidied his clothes and quickly came out. Clarissa placed the camera on the man's back. Only then did she look up at the people in black on the opposite side. Raising her right hand, a few bullets scattered randomly onto the ground, making a clattering noise. Clarissa put one hand in her pocket and said, "Brothers, you want to snatch him from me? I've been fond of this man for more than a year. It won't be that easy to snatch him from me." Episode 546. It's Two Forces. The man opposite her was acting like an iceberg, full of a vicious aura like a demon. He frowned and glanced at Clarissa's headset. Then he raised his hand to stop his men. "You're from 129? Clarissa laughed harmlessly. "More or less." "Go." The man glanced indifferently at her, his eyes fixed on her ears for a moment. Then he turned around and disappeared into the night. Not far away, Clarissa stepped harder on the man's foot. She squinted at the other man's disappearing back, slightly puzzled. There was no information about that man in her database. Not long after, Jared rushed over. He frowned upon seeing the bullets scattered at her feet. "Something happened?" A few weird people came. Clarissa put down her feet and asked the others to take the man away. She reached out to hook up the camera next to him. "I caught Poison Dragon for you." "Okay." Jared nodded and looked at how Poison Dragon had been beaten up like a pig by Clarissa. He paused for a moment before saying, "Something happened to Lone Wolf." "What?" While sorting out her camera, Clarissa lifted her head. With Michael and the Underground Alliance, what could happen to her? "A virus." Jared explained it briefly and then said solemnly, "Now, the whole city is under emergency measures." "Isn't she more vigilant than that?" Clarissa frowned. Jared thought for a moment and shook his head. "I'm afraid the virus might have been latent in her body from a long time ago." Only then could it be explained. With Daniel and the others, shouldn't it be okay? These things weren't in Clarissa's knowledge. "It depends." Jared retracted his gaze. Nodding, Clarissa slung the camera over her shoulder. "This Poison Dragon is very good at disguising. He was the third most wanted criminal from Matthew, and many other forces have been keeping an eye on him. It took me a year to hide and lead him to Evanston to successfully arrest him. But whoever that was before wanted to snatch him away from me. You should keep him carefully." "Okay." Jared glanced at her and ordered for Poison Dragon to be taken back. Clarissa waved her hand. "I'm going to see our lone wolf." Jared went back with his subordinates to imprison Poison Dragon. He normally would have contacted Bessy when he caught Poison Dragon. But now, Jared thought for a while and called Michael. "He's such a difficult character. Boss, why did you arrest him?" Slag Dragon yawned and walked over to Jared's office. "Clarissa's actions will definitely infuriate Matthew, who has been wanting to arrest Poison Dragon for several years." However, only a thousand-faced spy could catch Poison Dragon, who had been running around the world. No one else could do it. "He's the main offender of Fairfield's 712 case." Jared glanced at him. Slag Dragon looked up in shock. "Someone there managed to alarm Poison Dragon? Could it be a boss? But that's not right either. We didn't even know her identity at the time." "It was Lone Wolf's grandma," Jared said lightly. Unlike Jared and Clarissa, Slag Dragon didn't understand Bessy's situation, but when he heard about Bessy's grandma, he widened his eyes involuntarily. "What kind of person is the boss's grandma?" Jared ignored him. He walked over to the computer and waited for Michael without mobilizing the data. It was almost 4 a.m. when Michael arrived. He came in with big strides.
Director Clark.
Michael always treated Jared and the others politely.
Just call me Jared.
Jared casually waved his hand and gave him a copy of the information.
We're a family. No need to be polite.
Michael received the information and paused.
I checked her grandma's information last year. You should also know that at that time her grandma was critically ill because all the drugs in Evanston had been transferred.
Jared glanced at him.
I know.
Michael nodded. He hadn't thought too much at the time.
It's 2 forces.
Jared pointed at the information.
It's very complicated, and countless people are caught in the middle. Recently, after Slag Dragon and Clarissa returned, the Underground Alliance people emerged. We only found out then, but there's still a lot of vague information.
Even 129 had taken a year to find out. Episode 547. I'll go for a news run first. Looking down at the information, Michael was bombarded with thoughts.
Professor Ann of the Northwestern University's medical laboratory?
He knew this Professor Ann, who was a very famous old professor in the medicine department of Northwestern University. He had never taught Michael, but because Professor Ann had always been inspired by charity, Michael had heard of him before.
We can only investigate to this point. The rest will be handed over to you. There's someone else I just reviewed. I think only you can find out something.
Jared nodded at him. He was naturally aware that Michael was the boss of the Criminal Police Brigade. Michael kept the information.
Who? Poison Dragon,
Jared said slowly. Michael looked up fiercely. At 6 a.m., Michael came out of 129's gate. Near April, the temperatures in the morning weren't very high, and the air was still quite chilly. Michael bit the cigarette lightly in his mouth, his spirits raised. Instead of returning to the research institute, he took out his phone and called Samuel. Samuel's entire mind was now on the Bright family. He had no idea what happened to Bessy.
Michael?
Samuel was a little puzzled to receive Michael's phone call. Michael stopped at the intersection, slender and tall. He puffed a smoke ring and asked softly,
Do you have Brian's phone number?
Half an hour later, in a cafe beside Northwestern University, Brian hurried over with a book and sat down across from Michael, looking energetic.
Michael, did something happen to Bessy?
Michael pushed a cup of coffee to him and shook his head lightly.
No, I'm here to ask you a few questions. Go ahead.
Brian had always been in awe of Michael, even if Evanston's rumors about Michael had flown all over.
Regarding Bessy,
said Michael casually while stirring the coffee with a spoon.
How much do you know about her childhood? Bessy?
Brian glanced at him. He also fell silent at the mention of Bessy. Michael quietly waited. Brian took out a cigarette from his pocket and slowly lit it. After a long while, he glanced at him.
What about it? Anything strange, just tell me.
Michael leaned back and pulled his collar with his other hand, his voice slightly dull. He resembled Bessy's usually inadvertent appearance.
When she was a child, she often left for no reason. She said she was skipping, but I know she probably went to Northwestern University's medical school to find someone.
Since Brian and the others had already acknowledged Michael, he didn't hide such information from him. He mentioned one thing he couldn't figure out.
And once, she came back in the middle of the night, drenched in blood.
Brian was very detailed. He also saw clearly how Michael tightened his grip on his spoon and revealed his blue veins upon hearing about Bessy being covered in blood.
What about her grandfather? Do you know about him?
Michael asked again.
Are you talking about the World Poker Tour?
Brian couldn't help frowning at the mention of the World Poker Tour. News of the World Poker Tour had spread all over Evanston recently, and he also disliked Frank.
I don't know. Neither her nor Grandma Wilson ever mentioned it.
Michael nodded. It wasn't surprising that a person like Bertha knew Frank, but it was surprising if she recognized a godfather and kept it hidden from everyone else. Reaching out to take the coffee cup, he took a sip and then turned to Brian, his emotions fading from his face.
Thank you.
After leaving Brian, Michael didn't return to the Research Institute and first went back to the Highline Apartments to take a bath and change his clothes. The smell of smoke on his body and the fatigue on his face disappeared. Only then did he drive to the Medical Research Institute. Bessy was still in the lounge at Daniel's laboratory. Daniel was her main caregiver now. Standing at the door, Michael adjusted his expression and state first before walking towards her. He was slender and handsome, and when he walked in, the light hit his face, highlighting his sharp eyebrows and adding color to the cold laboratory. "I'll go for the news run first. I'll see you later." When Clarissa saw Michael, she packed up her things and left. Episode 548. Moving to Austria is just around the corner. Michael greeted Clarissa before sitting down across from Bessy. With a determined expression, he put down her breakfast in front of her.
I brought the breakfast made by the chef.
He arranged the breakfast and tableware one by one, then said calmly,
Eat.
Okay. Bessy crossed her legs and glanced at the food on the table. It was a little too much, but she didn't say anything. Marvin, Mary's father, and Daniel all came in.
Thank you, Michael.
Marvin glanced at Michael, then sat down across from Bessy. He picked up a fork and ate some of his food. Mary's father ate while discussing the issue of activity with Marvin. After Bessy finished eating, she glanced at them. These people didn't treat her as one to be isolated from. She pressed on her aching temples. She raised a leg and kicked Michael's foot. Michael, can't you restrain them? While discussing the research topic with Daniel, Michael tilted his head, took out a lollipop from his pocket, peeled it, and then put it into her mouth.
Be obedient,
he said calmly. Seeing how calm he was, Bessy rubbed her forehead involuntarily and remained silent.
I brought the computer for you,
Michael said. Fine. Bessy stared at the computer on the desk and thought for a long while. She couldn't continue to harm people like this, so she could only help Kara and Elijah control the data remotely. After thinking about it, she opened up Luke's Twitter and sent him a message. Luke, help me to take care of the Research Institute and Mr. Rostron. Luke had keen senses. Bessy had disagreed to let him participate at first, and now she had made this remark. Without hesitation, he called her. Bessy just breezed past it. You know the Clark family and the World Poker Tour have met with problems recently. I'll handle it here. Luke was smart and knew that something was wrong, but he also knew that Bessy couldn't say.
Recently there was a rumor of a flu going around. You must take care. Since you like wearing a mask, it should be fine.
He had carefully nagged Scarlett, Brian, Bessy, and Pete. Sitting on the table, Bessy dangled her long legs and chuckled softly as she glanced in Michael's direction. Okay, Luke, you have to be careful too. She hung up. Then, she looked at Michael and slightly frowned. News of the virus has been publicized. Luke just told me.
This involves too many people. I can't control it.
Michael wasn't very bothered and just said casually,
We can only control the speed of proliferation, but not all the news.
After all, every hospital had quarantined patients, and those doctors and nurses would always tell their family members. There was no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. Sooner or later, the news would leak out. On the other end, Luke hung up and looked down, his eyebrows drooping. He quickly dialed Brian's number. With the participation of the medical organization and the Smith family, the Research Institute had begun a new research direction. This topic brought together almost all the top talents in the world. It also included the Smith family's weird Daylily series. A vaccine had been identified. The Clark family had suffered from all the setbacks in the previous period and had been greatly injured. During the recovery phase, the sudden appearance of the medical organization and the mysterious plants made public caused their stocks and financing to skyrocket. All the management figures of the Clark family's Research Institute sat at the conference table in a meeting. Aaron's face was flushed as he was high-spirited.
This time, our Clark family has achieved considerable success. The Evanston virus is well controlled, and there are the Austria's medical organization and the people behind the Daylily. Our research institute will become famous this time. Moving into Austria is just around the corner. Mr. Clark has good management.
The head of the research institute complimented.
After all, you're here, and it has attracted many people.
Initially, Aaron had a good relationship with Sherry. After investigating the Daylily, he had made great fanfare, and everyone was now aware of it. On the other hand, Rosemary had never preached such things. But because of that, most people were complimenting Aaron.
Sir, there hasn't been any movement in the World Poker Tour and from Jonas recently. There have been rumors that they've been arrested. Why don't we take this opportunity to go all out and show it to the West family?
Someone said. All aspiring people wanted to go all out, especially Aaron, who was proud of his achievements. Upon hearing this, he only thought for a moment before nodding.
Okay.
Episode 549. Do you know about the Underground Alliance? Michael didn't know nor care about Aaron's situation. He, Daniel, Mary's father, and the people from the medical organization had already found an inkling. In the laboratory, Michael took a test tube and glanced at Bessy, who was playing a game with her legs folded. He lowered his head and rearranged the experiment in his hands. The phone in his pocket rang. Looking down, he saw that it was Patrick.
I've found Professor Anne.
Christopher was at the airport now. The airport had restricted traffic recently, so he could only enter and not exit. He walked to a quiet place and continued.
He has returned to the Northwestern University's medical laboratory.
Okay. Reaching out, Michael slowly took off his white coat and walked outside. While playing a game, Bessy paused. She was playing a game of the poker tournament with her own account. Her speaker was turned on and Mary's voice could be heard. Bessy, carry me! Carry me, I want to kill him! Don't worry. Bessy bit a lollipop. She had been busy in Evanston and hadn't been so idle in a long time. She calmly manipulated the characters and said leisurely, I'm carrying you.
Shoot, Mary, you're not human. How could you let Bessy carry you and absorb your injuries?
A male voice sounded. Michael looked up and recognized the voice as Wendy, Bessy's high school classmate. He wanted to tell Bessy to come with him, but after seeing her play so happily, he didn't want to disturb her. He quickly left. It wasn't far from Northwestern University. Michael drove all the way there. It didn't take him long to reach Northwestern University. Now that the major hospitals in Evanston and people in the medical community had learned about the virus, people had started panicking. Northwestern University's medical laboratory had also established a medical team to study it. Michael was no less a madman than Bessy in the medical department of Northwestern University. So much so that his shadow had been shrouded in the heads of people in the medicine department, and many people knew him.
Mr. Clark, why are you here? Who are you looking for?
He parked his car at the gate of the laboratory and someone spoke excitedly after recognizing him. Closing the car door, Michael glanced over.
I'm looking for Professor Anil. Do you know where he is?
There were only a few professors in the medicine department, and not many professors had the last name Anil. Especially Professor Anil, who was an old professor that had been doing charity and helping orphans. He was even more famous in medicine school. The male classmate hurriedly said, "I know Professor Anil. He's helping others in the department. I'll take you to him." "Thank you," Michael said politely. The teaching building of the medicine department wasn't far. The boy quickly brought him to the classroom. Professor Anil was still in a lesson. Michael didn't dare call him suddenly, so he entered from the back of the lecture hall and sat in the last row. His temperament was too special, and his overwhelming aura and appearance attracted everyone's attention as soon as he entered. Soon, someone recognized him. Professor Anil was a gray-haired old man who lectured slowly. When he saw that half of the class was looking at Michael, he couldn't help but smile. As a surgeon who had never failed, Michael had a well-known reputation in the medical profession. "Since everyone is unwilling to listen, shall we listen to Mr. Clark's class?" Michael was forced to attend half the class. After class, Professor Anil pushed his glasses up and glanced at him. "You're looking for me because of Mr. Wilson's granddaughter, right? Come to my office." The relationship between Michael and Bessy was no longer a secret in the Evanston circle. "Sit." Professor Anil poured a cup of tea for him. "What is it?" "I want to know everything, including her and her grandma." Michael held the teacup, his face calm. Both he and Jared had checked Professor Anil's background. "It's amazing that you found me." Professor Anil pushed his glasses up and held his cup of tea. "Do you know about the Y3 virus in Evanston?" Michael asked, lightly. Professor Anil wasn't bothered. "I heard about it." "She has it." Michael looked at him expressionlessly. Bam! The hot tea in Professor Anil's hands fell onto the marble floor. His eyes stared at Michael dully, and the corners of his mouth trembled. Michael waited patiently for him to return to his senses. After a long while, Professor Anil finally stood up. He walked over to the cabinet, took out a bunch of keys, opened a lock, and took out a white bottle. There was a scribbled B on it. Michael stared at the white medicine bottle. This was hers. Professor Anil placed the bottle in front of Michael, pausing for a moment. "Since you found me, you should know about the Underground Alliance." Michael nodded as his eyes fixated on the white medicine bottle. "She has been making deals with the Underground Alliance, using these to continue her life with her grandma. Her grandma died after her grandpa's death, but she dragged her back for a few more years." Professor Anil's eyes were a little lost, and his tone was undetectable. "You should also know what kind of organization the Underground Alliance is. She has been hiding the task of trading a life for a life from her grandma since she was 14. Episode 550, B502. Michael tightened his hands on his knees. He had already filled in the remaining blanks. Bessy regarded Bertha as her own life and had been trading with the Underground Alliance for her. He didn't know how she did those tasks, but she must have gotten merit from them and was now in the deputy position. She had become a thorn in many people's sides. Back in the slum, even without him, even if Bessy hadn't experienced the 712 incident, she wouldn't have escaped from the Underground Alliance's schemes. No wonder she had only called Daniel at first. No wonder she had faked her death. She must have realized it herself. Fortunately, she had never revealed her identity. Otherwise, according to the Underground Alliance's methods, she wouldn't have been left alive. Alejandro. Michael silently repeated this name. He mostly understood that Alejandro might have noticed Bessy's identity not long ago, which was what started the White family's big show. Back then, the core figures involved with the crater were discovered.
Claudius and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, your father, and Mr. White all died. Professor Wilson was experimenting with medicine, and I tried to stop them from making their move, but as you know, I'm only a professor, so everything I did was useless.
Professor Anil's voice was old and feeble.
Anyone whom Frank wants dead will die. I thought he would let Bessy go. I didn't expect.
Frank had already been caught by Michael, but he didn't say anything to Professor Anil. He just stood up and bowed deeply to him.
Thank you.
He wasn't thanking him for telling him all of these things, but for his care towards Bessy. Michael turned around and left. Behind him, Professor Anil looked out the window.
No need. I also had a deal with her.
After a long while, Professor Anil took out a gold card. He lowered his head and murmured,
She does the tasks and transfers all the money to me, except the medicine.
Michael left the teaching building. The sun shone above his head, but he didn't feel any warmth. He took out his car key, but as soon as he walked to the side of the car, he saw a slender figure leaning against the door. It was Luke. He also wore a white research coat, looking rigorous. Though his facial features weren't as defined as Michael's, he had rare self-discipline, unlike most young people.
Mr. Clark, we need to talk about Bessy.
Michael knew Luke. He stopped and looked at him for a long time. Luke listened quietly, his expression remaining the same. After a long while, he finally said softly,
Can you take me to see her?
Michael knew that Bessy didn't want her friends to know about her situation, but Luke was too sensitive and he couldn't hide it from him. Hence, he nodded.
Get in the car.
Thank you, Luke said. Both of them remained silent all the way. Not long after, the car arrived at the Research Institute, but they found a bunch of reporters at the entrance, yelling in shrill voices.
Excuse me, why is there a person carrying the Y3 virus if the medical school isn't isolated?
Excuse me, who will be responsible for the lives of everyone in Evanston?
I heard that the Y3 virus carried by Miss Miller is more powerful than in all the affected people. Is that true?
Michael frowned involuntarily and turned the car into the underground garage entrance. He took out his phone and dialed Christopher.
What's going on at the medical school? Boss, I was just about to call you. Half an hour ago, news of the Y3 virus was spread.
Christopher's voice sounded very serious.
Miss Miller's affairs aren't known by anyone. The medical school is in a mess now.
Michael remained expressionless.
I see.
He parked the car. Getting out of the car, he immediately went to the underground garage elevator and went to the B5 floor. Luke had also heard Christopher and was feeling very anxious. Rare anxiety appeared on his face, and he couldn't calm down without seeing Bessy's current situation. B502. When Michael entered, Rosemary was standing at the door. At this time, she had lost the imposing aura of a strong woman. Suppressing her anger, she turned to Michael.
Why didn't you tell me about such a big thing? It wasn't necessary.
Michael's voice was calm and unwavering, and his face remained the same as always, as if he didn't know about Bessy's matters. Rosemary was about to say something, but Michael stopped and turned to her and Luke, smiling. He said in a very low voice,
Don't go in to see her until you calm down.
Rosemary looked at him, stunned. Her eyes turned red. Usually, even when Bessy coughed once, he'd frown for half the day. Under such circumstances, no one was suffering more than Michael. Luke stood at the door and adjusted his attire for a while before entering. Inside, Michael glanced at Bessy. She was still playing games with Mary, her mental state no different from before. Looking around, he frowned involuntarily.
Where's Daniel?
Michael. Marvin glanced in Bessy's direction and lowered his voice.
Aaron knows about Miss Miller and wants to send her away.
Nodding, Michael reached out to pull on his white collar.
Which conference room is he in?
Episode 551. The Ending, Step by Step. Marvin told him an address.
Okay.
Michael smiled and nodded slightly before heading straight to the conference room. In the meeting room, Aaron and most of the people in charge of the Research Institute were inside.
No, Dr. Brown, a dangerous person like Bessy must be sent away. The virus in her body is more powerful than all the others infected.
Aaron demanded.
Now that the media has been alarmed, Twitter is also discussing it. Everyone in Evanston is at risk. She can't stay here. By being in the Research Institute, she's putting everyone at risk.
Exactly, Dr. Brown. Daniel naturally refused to agree to such a thing. He stared at Aaron. Before he spoke, he heard a soft voice from outside.
Sir, there's no need to haggle with them. Let's go.
It was Michael who spoke calmly, wearing a snow-colored shirt and black trousers. Everyone in the Research Institute knew Michael. They also knew how much help Michael had been to the Clark family. But at this time, their lives were their priority. Even though they knew that Daniel and Michael were here and that Bessy wouldn't affect anyone in the Research Institute, they were still afraid. Now, they were united with the medical organization and wealth was right around the corner. They didn't want to make any mistakes. Thus, most of them didn't dare to look at Michael and remained silent. Aaron opened his mouth and said,
You also know that Twitter is pressing for public opinion. Several family members already called me, so I don't have any other choice.
Out of the countless families in Evanston, the richer ones cherished their lives even more. They had come to the Research Institute to get a vaccine and couldn't tolerate Bessy. Without saying a word, Michael glanced at them and turned to leave. Daniel stared at Michael for a long while and frowned.
Okay.
The moment Aaron saw Michael, his shoulders shrank subconsciously. He was also a little afraid of Michael now. But now that Michael said nothing and surrendered to having Bessy taken away, Aaron sighed in relief. He watched as Michael left. Now, the Research Institute, the medical organization, and the mysterious Daylily had two research teams. The good days were still to come, and Michael had also left. For him, this was an extremely good thing. Aaron couldn't help but laugh. He happened to see Rosemary standing at the door.
Don't regret it later.
Michael scrolled through Twitter while returning to the laboratory. This incident had been announced by an entertainment blogger. The comments below were all one-sided.
Although I'm Bessy's fan, I have to say, isn't she being too selfish? She's disregarding the lives of other people.
She's now studying in the Research Institute. Everyone is now in danger of being infected by the Y3 virus. By staying there, what if she accidentally infects other people? Occasionally, some people said that the virus was unlikely to spread through the air, but such comments were all ignored. Although the Y3 virus was terrifying, with the medical organization, the Smith family, and the news of a new vaccine coming out, the elite in Evanston and the netizens weren't actually worried and were just gossiping. Michael sneered. He bit a cigarette and lightly walked to the laboratory.
Get ready and take everything.
What's going on? Marvin glanced at Daniel, who was following Michael. Daniel shrugged and sneered.
That group of idiots, I guess they don't know that Michael loves the beauty and not the country.
Huh? Marvin didn't understand. Daniel glanced at him and remained silent. He took the computer and went out with Michael with the necessary experimental equipment. The group returned to the manor.
No.
The car stopped at the door. Marvin had a keen sense of smell and squinted his eyes slightly.
Michael, someone has broken into the manor.
At the same time, the people in charge of the two research groups in the Research Institute realized they couldn't contact the medical organization.
How could this be possible? Didn't we just transfer a piece of data? Mr. Brown and Mr. Smith are gone? What happened?
Everyone exchanged glances. Some kept dialing the phone, while some went to find Dr. Clark, Aaron, and Daniel. Aaron was dealing with a reporter.
I know everyone is concerned about the new vaccine, but please don't panic.
After he had dealt with the reporter, he received a call from the Research Institute. Upon hearing what the person on the other end said, his expression changed drastically. He hurried back to B502. He happened to bump into Mary's father, who was dragging a suitcase out.
Mr. Smith, please stay.
Aaron immediately called after him.
Has the Research Institute neglected you in any way?
Mary's father was calling Michael at the moment. Upon hearing this, he looked up, his voice a little honest, and said inexplicably,
I came because of Bessy. You know Bessy, right? She's my daughter's best friend. She even helped my daughter get into Northwestern University. I'll follow her wherever she goes. Hey, sir, are you okay?
Episode 552. Find out where Michael is. Mary's father finished speaking and reached out to pick up a call. It was Mary. While dragging his suitcase, he babbled on.
Good girl, don't panic. I'm going to Bessy's place. Don't worry, I'm not that kind of person. Wait a while. I'll be there soon.
As he spoke, he looked up at Aaron and his party.
Please make way. I have to leave quickly.
The senior members of the Research Institute exchanged glances. They took a long while to return to their senses, and they all groaned inwardly. The world's new vaccine was in the hands of B502. The Clark family had to rely on them to comfort the masses and to stabilize themselves. But now, Mary's father was leaving. So what did the Clark family have to comfort the masses? How were they going to explain to the wealthy and the nobles in Evanston? This change had come too suddenly. Aaron and the others were still stunned. At the same time, a researcher next to him finally dialed the number of a domestic student in the medical organization.
Sir, I've dialed the number of the medical organization. This used to be a student of mine.
Everyone gathered around. Aaron also recovered and said in a panic,
Hurry, ask him what's going on.
The researcher quickly turned on the speaker. Teacher? The student asked on the other end suspiciously. The researcher hurriedly asked with a gentle but eager voice.
Amy, did something happen at the medical organization? Why haven't we received any news yet when they said they would send it tonight? Mr. Clark is still waiting.
Oh. Amy paused for a moment and shook her head. You can forget about it. If it's still possible, you should quickly apologize to Mr. Clark. There might still be a way to turn this around.
You haven't fulfilled the contract. Our researchers have put in so much effort into the vaccine. If you do this, our chances of cooperation in the future will diminish greatly.
Aaron quickly took the phone, his thoughts running rampant in his mind. Amy was rendered speechless for a moment before she said inconceivably, Cooperation? Who cooperated with you? Did you misunderstand something?
What?
Aaron subconsciously felt like something was wrong. Sure enough, Amy's next sentence completely shattered his imagination. Why would the medical organization need to cooperate with anyone? The teachers of the various laboratories of the medical organization only helped to analyze the data and research experiments because of Mr. Clark. He's the next heir of our medical organization. Otherwise, where else can you find someone who can dispatch the entire medical organization? Are you guys out of your mind? As soon as Amy's voice fell, everyone broke into a cold sweat.
Michael, how could it be?
Everyone cried out in alarm. The heir of the medical organization was basically at the top of the medical world. How could the patriarch of the Clark family compare? Amy hung up and everyone else remained silent. They turned to look at Aaron silently.
"Sir, the reporters have come again."
Someone hurried over. Looking up blankly, Aaron turned to Rosemary with pleading eyes.
"Sister."
Rosemary shook her head and sighed involuntarily. Her dad's choice of name for Aaron was a fault in writing. He excessively believed that he was infallible. He still couldn't recognize the situation even at this point. Disregarding other things, it was obvious from the relationship between Daniel and Michael that this matter wasn't simple. The 4 major families in Evanston were now different, but Aaron still didn't understand this. He always thought that the Clark family was the head of the 4 major families and didn't think anyone should be given higher priority. He had no problem doing other things, but he never should have touched Bessy. Previously, no matter what happened in Evanston, Michael never thought of doing anything to the Clark family. Who would have thought that he would actually make a move against the Clark family for her?
"I told you earlier to be lenient wherever possible. You have to be thankful for being Dad's son. At this point, the media and the major cities in Evanston are waiting for tomorrow's upstarts in the new vaccine. Go and figure out how to deal with it."
Rosemary glanced coldly at him and turned to leave. She was worried about Bessy's condition and the vaccine research and didn't care much about the Clark family at this point. After she left, Aaron was rendered speechless. Flustered, he took a startled step back. Everyone around urged him.
"Sir, what should we do?"
"Sir, another media outlet called."
"Sir?"
Aaron's busy tongue was dry. After a long while, his diminished eyes lit up, and he came to a final decision.
"Contact your sister and find out where Michael is. We'll go to them and plead for their forgiveness."
Episode 553. Bessy, come back with me. It was brightly lit at the villa. Alexander, who had been waiting outside, glanced at Marvin. He didn't feel like outsiders had broken into the manor.
"Someone obviously stayed behind to guard the manor."
Marvin got out of the car and glanced deeply and profoundly at him. He shook his head heavily.
"You don't understand. I'm talking about an outsider who broke into the manor. Marvin, are you disrespecting me?"
Alexander had a violent temper and flared up easily. Patrick stopped him. Alexander turned to him.
"Patrick, don't stop me. I must show him today who's boss." "No."
Coughing, Patrick whispered to him.
"I'm afraid you can't beat him."
Alexander was speechless. What in the world? It was very quiet in the manor. At the end of the cobblestone road, no servant came to open the door, and it was unreasonably quiet. Michael walked beside Bessy while Daniel walked behind, calling the old man from the medical organization. Everyone else walked behind them. Michael slowly reached out to open the door. The lobby on the first floor of the manor was very large, and the figure of someone standing in the center was very clear. He had his back to the door and seemed to be looking at the mural. His figure was long, and he was dressed in white, making it seem like his whole body was engulfed by ice and snow. The servants and the cooks of the entire manor were held aside. Unfamiliar men in black with an imposing air held knives at their neck. The man seemed to hear them and turned sideways. Looking at the person entering the door with a calm expression, he said clearly, "You're back." When Christopher entered behind them and saw his face, his expression changed drastically. Although he had only met him once in Austria, he still recognized him immediately.
"Mr. Schuler? Why is he here?"
he whispered.
"I know this was a conspiracy."
Patrick narrowed his eyes.
"How could Terry and Giant Crocodile manage to stop Alejandro so easily?"
Christopher and Patrick fell into the first-degree alert and dialed their phones quietly. Daniel didn't know Alejandro, however. He hung up his call and glanced doubtfully at Michael and Christopher. Lowering his voice, Christopher whispered to him solemnly,
"Mr. Brown, this is the Underground Alliance's leader."
There was no need for Christopher to say anything else. Those in Austria knew what the Underground Alliance was if they had some power and connections. Especially Daniel, who was very familiar with Michael. Naturally, he knew that this was Matthew's most wanted criminal, the one who gave him a headache with his vicious methods. Upon hearing this, Daniel took a deep breath. Somewhat in disbelief.
"How did my brother and Bessy provoke him?"
Christopher shook his head silently. He faced Alejandro in defense. Christopher turned to Michael.
"Boss?"
He waited for instructions. At the same time, everyone behind Michael was guarded against the enemy, now that Evanston was in a state of emergency. Alejandro had managed to capture the people in the manor first. This showed his considerable power in the country. However, unexpectedly, Michael lowered his head and said calmly to Bessy,
"I asked the chef to prepare a bowl of nutritious soup for you."
A little impatient, Bessy frowned. "I want meat."
"Okay."
Michael nodded. He looked at the chef who had a knife at his neck and said calmly,
"Did you hear her? Miss Miller wants to eat stew tonight." "Okay, sir."
The chef quietly took out a small notebook and a black pen from his pocket and noted down the order very solemnly. The man in black with the knife at his neck was speechless. After the chef finished taking it down, he carefully glanced at Bessy and asked politely,
"Miss Miller, is there anything else you want?"
Bessy looked blankly at the chef. She felt like this chef was really a talent. Christopher and Daniel also looked at the chef with complicated expressions. Alejandro's expression didn't change at all. His eyes turned sharply from Michael to Bessy, and he smiled slightly. Looking like the first time Bessy saw him many years ago, he finally said softly,
"Bessy, come back with me." "So that you can set her up again?"
Michael turned sideways and stared faintly at him. He smoothed Bessy's slightly wrinkled collar and said slowly,
"Impossible." "I regret it. After the news of your death, I regretted it."
Alejandro restrained the boiling blood inside him, and his eyes grew deeper as he stared intently at Bessy.
"You said before that we're the best comrades. I'll always give you my back."
What back? Annoying. It was really annoying. Michael was too impatient for this. Frowning, he directly turned his head.
"Alejandro, is this the reason why you activated the virus in her body?"
Episode 554. Bessy, don't fall into his trap. Alejandro stared deeply at him before saying,
"Michael, you should also know that she has a virus in her body, and I have the suppressors. Only I can save her. I'll give you half of the Austria territory. You only went to Chicago back then because of the crater. As long as you hand her over to me, all of this will be yours."
The hand Michael used to squeeze Bessy's hand suddenly paused. His inner blood surged. This was the reason why he hadn't acted on Alejandro these 2 days. Behind him, Daniel remained silent and looked worriedly at Michael. The new vaccine for the Y3 virus was only a preventative measure. Daniel didn't know how long it would take for them to develop a suppressor that could completely deactivate it. Maybe soon. Maybe not. No one was sure if Bessy could wait until then.
"You..."
Michael looked up. The calmness and gentleness in his eyes completely gone. His eyes were cold, and his palms also gradually turned cold. He had participated in the virus research from beginning to end. He had turned over the virus books of the Research Institute these few days. At that moment, he could hear his own heart beating inside. He had personally witnessed his own father's death. His pulse had slowly stopped, and his eyes had closed slowly, little by little. From then on, any traces of this person in the world had been wiped out, as if he was no more. Michael didn't dare to imagine what it would be if it was Bessy. Even at the simple thought of it, his heart felt like a knife was twisting inside him, making him breathless. He couldn't and didn't dare to think of it. He never showed the slightest impatience in front of Bessy.
"Brother."
Daniel gave him a worried look. Bessy stood beside Michael, waiting for a long time without receiving his answer. She dug her ears with the other hand and turned to him, raising an eyebrow. Laughing in anger, she talked as if she wasn't an alien with a virus active in her.
"Are you seriously thinking about it?"
Looking up, Michael chuckled twice, then looked helplessly at Alejandro.
"Didn't you see that? I'm also very helpless."
The worried Daniel turned speechless. This was his brother indeed. Without regard for Alejandro, Michael patted Bessy's head and said lightly,
"Go upstairs and rest. Come down to have beef stew later."
Bessy felt like if it had been someone else who didn't give her a good meal before her death, she would have screwed the other person's head. But since it was Michael, she nodded. "I'll go and get some sleep." She had recently been injected with many drugs by Daniel. Her spirit was indeed not as good as before. She headed upstairs. It was as if Alejandro and his men didn't exist. Alejandro watched as she calmly walked upstairs. His eyes gradually turned cold and the smile on his face also slowly faded. He pursed his lips and stared after Bessy. After a long while, he chuckled, nodded and muttered,
"I don't want to force you."
Bessy swiftly stopped. She put her hands on the handrails, her delicate face expressionless as she stared fixedly at him with dark eyes.
"Your brother is in my hands."
Alejandro closed his eyes before meeting her gaze.
"As long as you come back with me and never return to Evanston, I'll make sure he comes back safely."
Alejandro knew Bessy very well and knew what to use against her. Daniel couldn't help but shout,
"Despicable!"
Bessy remained silent. She had told Zeke before to let Tucker come back. Who knew that Alejandro would grab him first? Ever since she could remember, Claudius had told her in a complicated way that she should revere the Schuler family. At that time, Bessy hadn't understood. She only understood recently. Claudius knew that she was extremely talented and had surrendered to Frank in order to protect her. She was asking a fish for its scales. For so many years, she had been careful not to let Alejandro discover her identity. When he found out that she wasn't dead, everyone around her would suffer. Alejandro never doubted that his righteous sister Bessy was the thorn in his side. She could protect her people temporarily, but there were always loopholes. What happened to the White family had caught Bessy by surprise, and she had no choice but to contact Kobe. Bessy's hostility gradually rose. Alejandro calmly spoke again, his voice gentler.
"Bessy, come back with me." "Bessy."
Daniel's expression changed.
"Don't get agitated. Don't fall into his trap." "Miss Miller."
Marvin also shouted worriedly. In the tense atmosphere in the hall, a laugh suddenly sounded. Everyone subconsciously looked towards the source. Tilting his head, Michael looked at Alejandro calmly. In the tense atmosphere, he exuded a calm and relaxed aura, without any sense of panic. He only took out his phone and made a call. Episode 555. Mr. Clark, are you short of men?
"Bessy, answer the call."
He threw the phone to Bessy from afar. Bessy reached out and accurately caught it. As soon as she did, the call went through. It was Tucker on the other end, sounding a little far away.
Uncle, I'll take it myself.
The sound of the wind could be heard. Then, an approaching voice sounded.
Brother-in-law, I've arrived at the airport with my uncle. I also saw Uncle Xander. Where are you and my sister?
Bessy was speechless. The anger brewing in her heart surged, and she felt a little embarrassed. She slowly kept the phone and looked at Michael. She wanted to ask when he had brought Tucker over, and he was even calling him brother-in-law now? I'll go up to rest. Bessy raised her head. Downstairs, Alejandro, who had been staring at Bessy with a look of victory, finally turned to Michael with surging eyes.
I've really underestimated you. Same here. I didn't expect you to play giant crocodile and Terry from abroad.
Michael said very politely and calmly. Alejandro stared at him motionlessly. He turned to Bessy.
You really want to stay here? Don't you see them? Besides him, everyone fears you and wants you to leave. How's that different from the situation in the Underground Alliance at that time?
With Michael here, Bessy felt like she wouldn't be afraid of Alejandro taking revenge on the people around her. What she missed and neglected to take precautions against were just as Michael said. This time, she could completely rest assured and leave everything to him. She stopped and looked at him seriously. It's different. Alejandro retorted softly.
Oh, really? What's the difference? Look at the Clark family and the people at the Research Institute. They even kicked you out. Look at the White family, too. Which one of them isn't just using you, fear you? They just want the news of the crater you hold. And those friends of yours, do you think they came into contact with you without any grudges? Bessy, open your eyes and take a good look at the people around you. No one is unafraid of death. Driving you out of Evanston is the best proof.
He wasn't done talking when a voice suddenly sounded from outside the gate.
Why is it so crowded?
Someone said as he came in. It was Mary's father. Sighing, he looked at Bessy.
Bessy, Mary will come over later. I've already explained it to her, but she was very angry when she saw the news. You might have to help her break into the second highest level, 19 stars.
Alejandro paused and stared at him. Mary's father didn't care about the extra people and just looked at Daniel.
Daniel, have you set up the equipment yet?
Daniel paused.
Mr. Smith, why are you here now? Oh.
Mr. Smith slowly raised the shovel in his hand and handed it to Marvin.
Marvin told me before that his shovel wasn't easy to use. I saw an unused shovel on the road and I didn't have enough money on my hands. That person doesn't have Twitter yet. Marvin, what do you think of this shovel?
Mary's father showed him the shovel. Marvin weighed it and thought it was okay.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Daniel stared in confusion. Just as the two of them were conversing, another car parked outside the door. Immediately afterward, Aaron and a group of people from the Research Institute rushed in to apologize. Dr. Clark spoke first.
Michael, Miss Miller, we're very ashamed of the ways of the Research Institute. We're here today to beg for your forgiveness.
Daniel paused in confusion.
Aren't you afraid of being infected with the virus?
Shaking his head, Dr. Clark said deeply,
I'm afraid that the virus will spread. Miss Miller provided us with experiments and test drugs.
Having said this, he bowed deeply to Bessy.
On behalf of the Research Institute and everyone in Evanston, I thank Miss Miller.
Besides the Clark family, things snowballed and other people came in next. It was Kenneth, Norman, and the others. Because of the ban, the White family's goods hadn't been shipped to Austria. Norman rushed in anxiously and was immediately relieved to see Bessy standing on the stairs.
Mr. Clark, are you short of men? The White family has been idle recently. Yes, Mr. Clark. Just let us know if you need anything.
The rest of the White family immediately said. Episode 556. Up in Flames. Having calculated everything except this, Alejandro was speechless. Michael raised an eyebrow at Bessy.
Aren't you supposed to be resting?
Looking at the noisy crowd downstairs, Bessy's head throbbed. She massaged her temples and nodded. Okay. She headed upstairs. Her figure finally disappeared. Michael kept the smile on his face and put his hands behind his back. Looking up, he glanced over lightly at Alejandro. The hostility and rage that had been restrained for several days, finally exploding now.
Boss, Matthew called.
Christopher respectfully handed the phone to him. Michael took it and said lightly,
She's with me. Where are you? Okay.
Listening to his few words, Alejandro's arrogant face finally changed. He pursed his lips at Michael.
How did you get Matthew over? Aren't you afraid he'll swallow your power?
Michael chuckled.
I used the manor, 40% of Japan's rights, and America's open trade rights to make this transaction with him. You're insane.
Alejandro sputtered. The conditions Michael listed were comparable to 70% of the Underground Alliance's rights. His eyes shone fiercely.
Leader, let's go.
Not far away, one of Alejandro's subordinates finally spoke.
Let's not drag this on. It's not worth it.
Even if someone with Alejandro's status really wanted to use the Underground Alliance to make a deal with Matthew, it wouldn't just be for Bessy. Just like when Alejandro set up Bessy for the overall situation. At first, 50% of what Alejandro said to Michael was just a verbal transaction. Alejandro knew what the subordinate was talking about. He looked away.
Let's go.
Michael said firmly.
Alejandro, I let you in today. Do you think I would let you go?
Outside the manor, a roaring helicopter sounded.
The Schuler and Klein families. For so many years, everyone has lived in the shadow of the crater.
Michael took out a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a very special piece of paper. He glanced at Alejandro.
All for this secret?
Staring at the paper in his hand, Alejandro's eyes finally moved and he muttered.
She actually gave it to you? Yeah, she doesn't want to deal with this.
Michael calmly looked at the piece of paper and took out a lighter.
The Schuler family forced the Wilson family to study these things, and Mr. Wilson did indeed research on it.
Claudius had been kicked out of Evanston and had taken a group in the Research Institute silently. He had finally researched something, but he hadn't known to hand it over to the Schuler family. The Schuler family found out about it and ordered Poison Dragon to snatch it. Later, a series of accidents had been caused at Scarlett's house. Claudius was very smart and had given things to Bertha. It was so that Bessy could exchange it for her life if she was threatened by the Schuler family in the future. Crack! A faint fire rose. It seemed to know what Michael was about to do. Alejandro stepped forward.
Michael!
The tongue of the fire swallowed the paper. Letting go, the ashes scattered all over Michael.
For this, how many people have died? Everyone regards her as a chess piece. Such things shouldn't have appeared in this era in the first place.
As he lightly raised his head, Matthew entered. Upstairs, in Bessy's room, she solemnly looked in Chicago's direction. Episode 557. I Just Wanted to Arrest You. Alejandro was taken away by Matthew. Daniel looked down. Marvin took the small shovel and glanced at him.
What?
Daniel turned to him. Marvin whispered.
Mr. Brown, it's really 40% of the shares. You were right.
Michael had really lost his head over love. Alejandro never expected Michael to really give up half his assets for Bessy. Daniel also returned to his senses and nodded.
Take me to my brother's laboratory.
In Evanston, the virus in Bessy was still active, and Evanston was still caught in the Y3 virus storm. The good news was that Mary's father's plants really had the miraculous effect of restraining the virus. Michael, Daniel, and the world's major medical laboratories worked overtime to study it.
Daniel, don't move. Let me help you with such trivial things.
Robert printed out the manuscript and handed it to Daniel before leaning on the table.
Is Bessy okay?
The lab team was no longer surprised by this.
Mr. Smith.
Daniel shook his head. He read the manuscript for a while and looked up thoughtfully at Mary's father.
How did you cultivate these plants?
Taken aback, Mary's father scratched his head.
It wasn't me. A gentleman gave it to me. Do you remember him?
Daniel directly stood up.
Yes.
Mary's father paused.
He was the manager of the underground auction house.
Underground auction house. Daniel nodded and found Christopher at the door. Christopher put down the things at hand.
Yes, Mr. Brown?
Daniel relayed Mr. Smith's words.
Christopher was stunned. Are you sure it was the person in charge of the underground auction house? I'm certain. I've been dealing with the underground auction house,
Mary's father said sternly. Christopher nodded.
Then I'll take you to find Boss.
Looking at Christopher's expression, he knew that something was wrong. He frowned and asked,
What's the problem? Nothing.
Christopher shook his head.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Smith, I'll take you to find Boss first. The underground auction house belongs to him.
He only answered faintly. Robert spat out his sip of water and stared blankly at him. Christopher glanced at him and nodded to confirm it. Upstairs, when Christopher and the others came in, Michael was looking at the research sent by the medical organization. Bessy sat not far from him, wearing headphones and helping Mary get to the supreme level with 19 stars.
Any results?
Michael put down the information in his hand and glanced at Daniel. Daniel nodded.
We have an inkling. Mr. Smith's daylily was imported. Plants can secrete a substance. I asked him, as long as we can find the first transfer to the media and the method, we'll know this unknown substance.
Michael paused, his mind turning. Without saying a word, he took his heavy black phone from the drawer.
Open the plant information.
These few days he had pretended to be fine on the surface, but he was having an inner turmoil. He was afraid it would be too chaotic. He almost forgot that he still had these. The black mobile phone lit up slowly, casting a 4-dimensional projection in the air. At the same time, densely packed text appeared on the plant page. Michael scrolled directly to the one he needed and turned to Daniel.
Is this right?
The 4-dimensional engine that the Miller Corporation had recently studied came into effect. James had even given each of them a phone. Daniel wasn't surprised by this and just stared seriously at the page. After reading it, his accumulated nervousness over the days finally eased. He sank onto the ground, buried his head in his knees, and finally choked out.
I know what this substance is.
Daniel is the originator of viral micromolecules in the medical world. The relaxed atmosphere of the manor and the laboratory finally erupted. Only Bessy leaned back in her chair and thoughtfully glanced at the phone in Michael's hand. After a long while, she seemed convinced. I finally found your long-lost brother. In the opposite room, the hand suffocated in the black bag flickered wildly. In a special cell in Austria, Alejandro and several of his men were all locked up. Sitting in a chair, he closed his eyes and rested, as if nothing in front of him could halt his meditation. Matthew came in with a booklet.
Michael used most of his forces in exchange for cooperation with you.
Alejandro opened his eyes and looked lightly at him. Matthew nodded and exclaimed despite himself.
He indeed paid a heavy hand.
Several of Alejandro's men couldn't help but stare fearfully at him. Michael was indeed insane. No wonder Matthew was impressed.
I'll make a deal with you two. The Underground Alliance and 50% of Austria.
Alejandro said slowly.
Oh, that won't be necessary.
Matthew indifferently waved his hand.
I just wanted to arrest you.
Episode 558. 129's Veteran Lone Wolf. Alejandro's man suddenly looked up.
Matthew, greed has no end.
Ignoring them, Matthew glanced at the time.
Is the wedding coming?
Yes. His left and right-hand men bowed respectfully.
Then I'll have to hurry. I'll leave the rest to you guys.
Matthew quickly left. After he left, Alejandro asked, startled.
Her wedding?
Yeah. Matthew's men nodded. They looked down at the document in their hands and got ready to open the mechanism.
Wait!
Alejandro's men said hurriedly.
How much do you want to let us go? Boss already said he just wanted to capture you.
Matthew's men replied to him patiently.
Nonsense!
Alejandro's men sneered.
Didn't he take Michael's stuff?
Hearing this, Matthew's men exchanged glances and said ineffably,
Yeah, he did take them, but he returned them today.
Alejandro and his men were stunned. They subconsciously thought it was impossible.
Miss Miller and the boss have a life and death relationship. How could he possibly take Mr. Clark's things?
Without waiting for them to react, they closed the door. After the door closed, the subordinate who had previously urged Alejandro to stop glanced at him in a daze and said in horror,
Sir, maybe I was wrong.
Matthew was the fourth largest force in Austria. He was almost on par with the Underground Alliance. Bessy and Matthew's life and death relationship, as spoken by Matthew's confidants, was certainly no lie. He previously felt like it wasn't worth it for Alejandro to fight with Michael over Bessy, but now he was full of regrets. Thinking of this, he hurriedly looked at Alejandro. Alejandro closed his eyes again, deep in his thought. In the maximum security prison, the person Sherry was waiting for finally visited. It was Jonas's confidant. She took the phone and directly exclaimed, Are you here to get me out? Jonas's confidant looked at her and slowly shook his head.
Sorry.
What? Sherry glared furiously at him.
I already contacted Giant Crocodile and also cooperated with the chairman.
The confidant looked at her with pity.
What kind of expression is that?
Sherry's heart shook.
Giant Crocodile didn't cooperate with the chairman. The chairman, he has been arrested as a suspect for the criminal case.
Sherry pursed her lips and sneered.
Impossible. Today's the wedding of Mr. Clark and Miss Miller.
The confidant shook his head. Gritting her teeth and clasping her hands tightly, Sherry seethed.
That Bessy, she's really lucky. Miss Flake.
The confidant sighed.
You probably don't know.
What? Sherry looked up. Jonas's confidant took out his phone and showed her a picture that Slag Dragon sent. The picture showed 129's Lone Wolf's information. Sherry naturally knew who Lone Wolf was. He was the core figure of 129's 5 veterans. 129 had reached this point all because of him, and every year, countless people had joined for Lone Wolf. He was an idol in the eyes of everyone in the criminal investigation circle. He was naturally so in Sherry's eyes. Although she had never seen the 5 veterans, Sherry was serious about them, especially the most famous, Lone Wolf. But she saw Bessy's picture on Lone Wolf's information. Sherry stood up abruptly.
This is impossible. Impossible. How could it be her? Mr. Giant Crocodile was just a trap. He accepted your connection because of Miss Miller.
The confidant kept the phone and glanced at Sherry's desperate appearance. He shook his head and left. Sherry was soon brought downstairs. She wasn't stupid. On the contrary, she was very smart, or she wouldn't have entered 129. She had already figured everything out the moment the confidant said those words to her. No wonder Rosemary's order had been taken by Giant Crocodile. Bessy hadn't been surprised at all when she told her about 129. No wonder she herself could suddenly contact Giant Crocodile. No wonder Giant Crocodile suddenly cooperated with Jonas. And no wonder she hasn't been picked up by Giant Crocodile's men until now. It turned out that Bessy was Lone Wolf. Sherry tuned out the jailer's words and walked in the long passageway in a daze. Because she was a member of 129, she had put on airs and let it all get to her head under everyone's praises in Evanston. But she couldn't help but bow her head in front of 129's veteran, Lone Wolf. At the thought of how much she bragged in front of Bessy before, she wondered how Bessy must have thought of her. Episode 559. Are you guys prepared? In Austria, at the Hall family's house, Lionel shook his head and frowned.
Participate in the wedding? In Evanston. I'm not going.
With this time, he might as well go to the Moss family. Carrie didn't want to go either. Grandpa, I don't want to go either. She frowned. For the first time, Brandon showed the patriarch's momentum.
You must go.
Brandon didn't want to miss out on Bessy's big day. Carrie and Brandon said no more. After Brandon left, the two exchanged glances and Lionel frowned.
Your grandpa is crazy.
It was just a wedding in Evanston. What was the Miller family? But since Brandon had spoken, they had no other choice.
Let's go tomorrow.
Lionel frowned and said forcefully.
We'll come back after the wedding.
Carrie frowned as well. Although she didn't want to go, she didn't dare to defy Brandon's orders and could only agree unhappily. In July, many people came to Evanston for tourism, but it was on the hot search today. That was because several avenues to the ancient buildings had been sealed, especially the old city wall, which was even more airtight. Internet discussions were in full swing. I've never heard of any summit in Evanston.
It must be a heavyweight inspection.
Wait for the boss to come out and reveal the secret.
The secret is out. Someone's getting married today. Please send me a hotspot.
This comment caught everyone's attention.
Married? It's such a big deal. It can even block roads. What in the world? My gossip heart has been triggered.
We're all waiting online to see the live stream. The discussion was in full swing. In the Miller family's old house on the second floor, Brian, Kara, Alyssa, Mary, and Scarlett, all of Bessy's friends, were there.
They're here. I saw the car.
Jack rushed forward excitedly.
Tucker, Pete, close the door. Don't let your brother-in-law enter easily later.
Tucker and Pete hadn't said anything yet. Standing at the door, Mary patted her chest. Jack, don't worry. We know that. Bessy's bridesmaids were Scarlett and Mary. As for Kara and Noah, they were Bessy's relatives and friends. Brian leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window with his arms folded. He glanced out of the window and couldn't help but laughing.
Jack is so anxious, we haven't even seen the team.
Beside her, Paul also burst out laughing.
I'm afraid he saw it 2 miles away.
Mary, Kara, and Scarlett saw that they had yet to come, so they checked the doors and windows first. They checked the difficult puzzle again. Kara threw away the shoes in her hand and asked the people in the room, "Where shall we hide it?" "Easy." Clarissa, who had been acting as the photographer, casually took the shoes from her and stuffed them under the skirt of Bessy's dress. She then looked around at the people in the room and lifted her chin.
Vicious.
Paul widened his eyes and gave her a thumbs up. Who would dare to lift the boss's skirt? Clarissa said breezily, "So-so." They were still talking. Brian stood up.
The car's here.
Let me see. Mary walked to the window and lifted the pale curtains. At first glance, she saw the motorcade downstairs just beyond her view, and she immediately lowered the curtains. She quickly glanced at Bessy. Clarissa took a picture of the situation downstairs and laughed. He must have gathered all the luxury cars in Evanston. No wonder they had to clear the roads. Tsk, prepare quickly. They're coming up soon. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. 3 rather light knocks. It's not that easy to get in. Kara and Mary held an answer sheet in their hands. Kara coughed and said, "First, answer 100 questions. The first one. What is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 multiplied by 999? You have 1 second." Not to mention Daniel, Robert, Samuel, and the others. Even Paul also smirked. Who made such a difficult question? Even the cell phone calculator couldn't solve this one in 1 second. It was Tucker, Pete said. Paul had nothing to say. Tucker was a real brother-in-law. He was still thinking of this when Michael said without any haste, 123,332,544. Paul replied, "You're indeed a part of this family." Tucker's questions couldn't even stop Michael for 5 minutes. Putting away the paper, Kara coughed again. Michael hadn't answered anything wrong. "Are you guys prepared?" Someone replied to her outside. Episode 560. Name on the box. Jared Covington. Mary put her hand to her ear. "What? I can't hear you." "I said," Samuel shouted, "we have a gift for Bessy," Mary said vigilantly. "Let me see." Sitting on the bed, Bessy didn't know what to expect. She and Kara opened the door cautiously and poked their heads out. As soon as she appeared, Daniel tried to get his hand on the door to come in, but the girls grabbed the envelope. Boom! Kara closed the door. Paul and the others leaned over. "Let me see. What is it?" Kara opened the red envelope. She was about to say something when Tucker walked over and poured the contents of the red envelope out. A diamond fell from it. After a minute, Kara, Mary, and the others all thought about life as they stared at the 50 diamonds arranged on the bed. Outside, Samuel continued knocking on the door. "We still have more." Kara, Mary, and the others were speechless. Due to a lack of manpower, Kara opened the door. Outside, Michael stood there, slender and noble. He looked through the crowd and amidst the noise, only focusing on the figure sitting on the bed. On this day, Bessy was wearing a traditional wedding gown, with a delicate white lace on the skirt. Her hair was tied up with golden pendants, hanging on both sides. She lifted her head slightly and glanced out the door. Bessy rarely put on makeup. Today was the first time she wore a gorgeous and solemn wedding gown. The white embroidered dress almost covered the whole bed. She sat in the middle of the bed, having waited for a long time. In the hustle and bustle, one leg was bent and her arm was supported on her leg. Her head was tilted and she was looking outside a little impatiently. The shallow sunlight hit her face through the pale curtains, making her look even more dauntless. Her complexion had always been extremely beautiful, and her beauty was like a divine delicacy that transcended time. Not to mention the others. Kara and Scarlett, who saw her wearing makeup for the first time today, had also been astonished by her beauty. "I finally know why the boss chose beauty over the country," Alexander whispered. Outside, Michael walked in, step by step. Kara asked them to find the shoes. Daniel and the 5 brothers rummaged through the entire room. Finally, Christopher shook his head and stopped the other 4 brothers. "Don't look for it." "Why?" Marvin looked up blankly. Christopher pressed his fingers to his lips. "You can't find it." "Just take this envelope." Anxious, Alexander took out 20 envelopes and stuffed them into Kara's hands. Having received another 20 diamonds, Kara was speechless. She silently lifted the hem of Bessy's skirt and took out the shoes. Marvin, Daniel, Samuel, and everyone else was speechless. What in the world? Dare I ask, which genius hid the shoes there? Alexander held up his hands in defeat. After filming a video, Clarissa lifted her head. Me. Alexander drew back a little and was speechless. This person had single-handedly captured Poison Dragon. Both the Clark and Miller families had been preparing for this wedding for a long time. Michael put on the shoes for Bessy. Pete silently carried Bessy downstairs. The court was in the old city building that had been left vacant next to the Clark family's manor. From the Miller family to the church, 10 miles of white carpet spread on the ground, and 100 tables were set for the banquet. The Clark and Miller families were receiving the guests. They were all distinguished guests, with gilded card invitations in their hands. Those who sent to receive the guests were important figures of both families. From the Miller family were Minister Miller, Jack, and Keith, while from the Clark family were the head security guard and Captain Baldwin. Hello. Another guest arrived. The Miller family bowed and politely took their invitation. He glanced at it and found the name on the invitation familiar. It was a guest on Bessy's side. This is the wedding gift. The man put down a box. The Miller family immediately refused it. Mr. Clark, we're not accepting gifts. However, the man still put down the gift box and entered. What's wrong? The Clark family's head security guard came over to take a look. He immediately saw the name on the box. Jared Covington. Sir? Minister Miller looked at him. Are you okay? No. The head security guard rubbed his face. Minister Miller was stunned. Is there a problem with Mr. Covington? Episode 561. Another Mr. Moss? Oh. The head security guard was no longer an ordinary security guard and had already experienced Austria. He shook his head. No, Minister Miller, don't you know that Mr. Covington is from 129? Minister Miller was speechless. He had yet to return to his senses when another guest came. The head security guard was stunned. Minister Miller finally received the guest. This person had also brought gifts. Mr. Moss, please come in. After Mr. Moss was sent in, Minister Miller turned to look at the head security guard. Sir, you... Matthew. The head security guard was a little flabbergasted. His name is Matthew, not Mr. Moss. His last name is Anderson. Minister Miller was taken aback. Sir, you know him too? The head security guard and another security guard from the Miller family exchanged glances. How could they not know the boss who caught them in Austria? Austria's Matthew? Minister Miller, Keith, and the others exchanged glances. They had never heard of him before, but were afraid that the Clark family would find them arrogant if they said so. Thus, they didn't dare to mention it and just kept quiet. Another guest arrived. Minister Miller didn't recognize him and nudged the head security guard. Sir, go and greet him. The head security guard said, I don't know him either. Just as they were talking, Christopher came out and bowed respectfully. Mr. Moss, please follow me. Christopher turned sideways and Marvin brought Mr. Moss in. They entered. The head security guard collapsed onto the ground. Minister Miller stared at him. Are you okay? The head security guard still had guests to receive. So, he stood up with wobbly legs and looked at Minister Miller. Feeling like he couldn't bear being the only one stunned, he said calmly, Do you know about the Moss family in Austria? That's the Moss family's patriarch. Minister Miller was speechless. He didn't know about the Moss family. But he knew just how powerful those related to Austria were. He was about to kneel down. As for Xander and Kenneth behind, a bunch of weird characters from Japan and the border arrived. But Minister Miller and the head security guard were already numb from the initial shock. At the wedding's main hall, Carrie and Lionel had already arrived. They arrived on the dot, a few days later than Brandon. There were 2 rows of tables on the red carpet. The head security guard welcomed the guest while Patrick and Simons arranged them.
Mr. Hall, Miss Hall, your seats are here.
Patrick politely led them to the second row. About to head to the main row, Lionel's face stiffened. He sat down on the second row with a dark expression, staring at the 2 tables in front of him.
We're actually sitting here? This Miller family.
Lionel scoffed. The person in charge of the Hall family also frowned in surprise.
The Miller family really doesn't know how to socialize. I can't believe they placed you here. I wonder who their main and second seats are reserved for. Who could they be?
Lionel drank a glass of wine indifferently.
I want to see who's sitting in front of me.
He hadn't even wanted to come today. Having been arranged to this seat, he felt even more irritated and neglected. However, Carrie didn't care about the wedding. She just looked down at her phone full of dense codes. Before long, someone sat down on the second seat. Lionel glanced at him and didn't recognize him. Hearing the service person call him Mr. Covington, Lionel continued sneering.
Mr. Moss, your seat is here.
It didn't take long for the second seat opposite him to be taken. Lionel put down his wine glass and turned his head indifferently again. He glanced at the second seat and saw the foreigner talking to Mr. Covington. He was wearing a formal suit and looked very serious. His beard was cleanly shaved. He looked a little familiar. Lionel was about to look away indifferently when he suddenly froze. He quickly took out his phone and logged onto Austria's official website. Everyone was now using the World Poker Tour's search system. It was universally used, and Lionel quickly entered the international building search data. His network technology wasn't as good as Carrie's, but it was still better than the average person. So he quickly found a photo of Interpol's Matthew with his beard shaved. It was a recent photo. Lionel compared the photo to the foreigner in a daze. His expression was a little frozen. He had yet to react. Someone else took a seat.
Mr. Moss, please sit here.
Another Mr. Moss? Episode 562, A Golden Age Wedding. Lionel turned his head stiffly to look at the other Mr. Moss, and it so happened to be the Moss family's patriarch. Puff. He failed to stabilize himself and slid off the chair. His movement was so loud that Carrie was alarmed.
What's wrong? Carrie,
Lionel stuttered.
Who on earth is my niece?
What? Carrie frowned. Lionel gasped.
Look at the main and second seats.
Carrie glanced over to see Christopher entertaining the guests, as well as the Moss family's patriarch. The 3 people from the Hall family fell into deep silence. At 10:50 a.m., the wedding officially started. The bride and groom appeared. Carrie looked up with a hunch. At this time, she couldn't help but look up in the direction at the end of the carpet. A couple came slowly. It was 2 faces she was extremely familiar with. Bam! Carrie's phone fell to the ground. It's her.
Michael, I'll give Bessy's hand to you today.
James placed Bessy's hand on Michael's and looked at Bessy's bright eyes, his voice choking up a little.
You've experienced so much together. I hope that from now on you'll have one heart and one mind and will share happiness and sorrow. I hope you'll respect and love each other.
Zeke, the MC, took the microphone and said solemnly,
The days to come will be very long. I hope you can endure the good for 100 years and live a harmonious long life."
White rose petals fell from the sky. Perhaps she had been standing for too long, for a petal fell on the hairpin on Bessy's head. Michael reached up to gently sweep off the petals. He squeezed Bessy's hand.
"Thank you, Dad." Good.
James wiped his eyes and looked at the couple. One was as lofty as other, and the other was like a cliff buried in 3 inches of snow. They were meant for each other. At the villa, Samuel, Daniel, and the others discussed the bridal chamber. But the bride felt like there were too many processes and was a little impatient. No one dared to go up to her.
"You go first."
Samuel glanced at Daniel.
"You and Bessy are friends of life and death."
"No way." Daniel grabbed an apple.
"My brother will kill me."
He turned to Tucker.
"Tucker, why don't you go up and lead the battle?"
He was the brother-in-law, Bessy's own brother. Everyone else encouraged him. Tucker glanced at them and directly left.
"Brother!"
Samuel waved. Tucker blocked his ears with both hands. He didn't want to listen. He didn't dare to say that it was fine to provoke his sister. But if he provoked his brother-in-law... Tucker thought of his bitter history of being abused by Bessy and remained silent. Upstairs, with a head of accessories on her, Bessy ran out of patience. As soon as she entered the room, she kicked the door and pulled out the hairpin on her head. Her hair had been combed by a professional hairdresser. It was very tight. It showed no sign of loosening even after the whole day. Bessy became increasingly impatient. Following behind her, Michael chuckled lightly.
"Let me help you."
Reaching out, he slowly took off all the hairpins on her head. Her black hair spread on her back like a waterfall, covering her neck. Her eyelashes drooped, and she tangled with the various straps of her wedding gown. Suddenly, her hand was grabbed. She looked up. Slowly, Michael helped her untie the outside strap. His head lowered. "I haven't bathed yet." Bessy's heartbeat was out of control now. Her fingertips were a little numb, and she was gasping lightly.
"No need."
The lights? Michael grabbed his cell phone and threw it aside. The lights turned off. The next day, after a day of gossip on Twitter, someone risked his life and posted a small video.
"Film god presided over the wedding? Noah was there? Damn, which influential family's daughter got married?"
100 luxury cars and banquet tables? Which boss's wife is this? Someone put on the fuzzy image of the bride.
I'm dead. I want to cry.
To make a long story short, I'm just an ordinary person. Today I went to the wedding banquet with my family. Picture 1. This is the person sitting at the 3rd table. Take a look. Picture 2 of a diamond. This was a gift for every guest. Soon after, someone revealed this ordinary person's identity. He was the president of Northwestern University's Student Union, the son of a prestigious family on the 2nd rungs of Evanston's pyramid. The netizens were speechless. Our love is witnessed by the world. I look up into your eyes, and you are everywhere. Episode 563. You can deal with it. In the manor, in the morning. Marvin was standing on a flower bed outside the door with the peerless shovel, his hands behind him as he looked out at his own country. Michael had circled a piece of land for him in the manor for his executive experimental use. When the servant brought Rosemary in, she saw him looking unpredictable.
"What is he doing?"
Rosemary paused. The servant bowed respectfully.
"Mr. Clark is observing the object."
Rosemary looked at him blankly. "What the hell?"
"Mr. Clark said I won't understand.
The servant lowered his head again. Rosemary was speechless. She walked into the room and the servant quickly served her a cup of tea.
"Where are Patrick and the others?"
Rosemary glanced around but didn't see them.
"Mr. Clark and the others are still receiving the guests."
Rosemary didn't dare ask what kind of guests he was receiving, but she instantly remembered that after the wedding yesterday, the head security guard and his subordinate sitting at the Clark family's gate had been in a daze, doubting their lives. Since the last time she went outside the country, she already felt like Michael, Patrick, and the others weren't ordinary.
"My brother and Bessy haven't gotten up yet?"
Rosemary took the tea and glanced upstairs. The servant nodded slightly. Rosemary leaned on the sofa and raised her eyebrows. Michael was a well-disciplined man who woke up at 6 o'clock every morning, which had once made her suspect that he was a machine. Humanoid machines also had such a day. Upstairs, the room was dim with only a few rays of light coming in from the gap. Several major forces and families in Fairfield had been renewed. Bessy had been very busy recently, taking care of the Research Institute's Plan B and Director Fielder. Furthermore, Emmanuel was also waiting for her in the Miller Corporation. She had to take time off to get married. The day after her wedding, she woke up at 6 a.m. in a daze. But before she got off the bed, the person beside her stirred. The room was dim and dark without the lights turned on, and the person seemed to wake up too. He hugged her tighter from behind and muttered,
"You're awake."
"Yeah," Bessy said subconsciously. "The Research Institute." He slowly pulled the quilt covering her up and seemed to chuckle.
"You can just ask for time off."
Anyway, they didn't wake up immediately. It was already 11 a.m. when they went downstairs. Bessy wrapped her sweater around her and slowly followed Michael downstairs. She saw Rosemary sitting on the sofa, having already finished 2 cups of tea. 11 a.m. was, in fact, probably not too late, right? Bessy bit her lip and pondered seriously. Rosemary had already drunk 3 cups of tea, finished half a plate of fruit, and went to the bathroom twice. While scrolling through Twitter, she saw the rising popularity of yesterday's grand and mysterious wedding. She actually intended to tease Michael when she saw them coming down, but seeing Bessy behind him, she somehow managed to restrain herself. Leaning on the sofa, she carefully looked at Bessy, then looked down at the popular comment on Twitter. "This is the First Lady of the Disaster City." She was still thinking of this when the phone rang. It was from the head security guard. Since the hall was full of her own people, Rosemary didn't avoid it and directly picked up instead.
"What happened?"
"Miss, a friend of Michael said that Fairfield has outstanding talents, so he wants to buy a building here and live in it."
The head security guard was about to cry. Rosemary asked,
"Who?"
"He seems to be from Japan."
The head security guard wasn't very clear. Rosemary couldn't help massaging her forehead. In order not to bump into those people, Christopher had specially taken Rosemary to identify them one by one yesterday, but it wasn't very detailed. But Rosemary knew these people weren't simple after seeing them on the same stage as Giant Crocodile and calling them brothers. Usually Giant Crocodile alone was enough to give them a headache. Fortunately, he had no schemes in Fairfield for the time being. This was a good thing for them. But living in Fairfield? Rosemary felt her heart thump fiercely in her chest, and she said a little tiredly,
"You can deal with it."
In the end, with Michael and Bessy here, nobody would dare to mess around. Michael and Bessy's friends amounted to more than a dozen. Hanging up, Rosemary turned to Michael.
"Brother, you and Bessy, when will your friends leave?"
Episode 564, Outside of Bessy's Life, Part 1.
I don't know. I'm on vacation, so Christopher is in charge now.
Michael kept his phone ringing because Samuel, Robert, and his old friends were all sending him messages. He took the time to look up at Rosemary and answered with a sense of righteousness. This vacation was impressive and could even startle the universe. Holding her phone, Rosemary felt like Marvin was right. Her brother hadn't been in the right state of mind lately. She felt like she would be better off discussing such things with Christopher. Bessy was also looking at her phone, scrolling through the greetings from her high school and university friends. She also saw the messages of Jared urging her order. Bessy casually told him she was on vacation and then turned off her phone to finish her last bite. Michael put down his phone and glanced at her.
Are you still going to the Research Institute?
Yeah. Bessy drank her tea slowly, thinking slightly. There's a meeting today, but I'm not assured. The Research Institute was now changing power. With the seal in her hands, she had cleaned the Research Institute from beginning to end and had replaced a lot of people. Even if she didn't go to the laboratory, she didn't feel relieved unless she attended the first conference. Understanding the importance of the matter, Michael went upstairs to take the printed documents and handed them to her. Are you ready? Bessy finished drinking and casually reached out for it. She was a little surprised when she saw the contents. Michael often helped her organize such things, be it researching experimental data or the Miller Corporation's big problems. It was just that she hadn't seen him sort these things out in the past 2 days.
I did it when I was free.
Michael went to the cabinet for his car key.
I'll drive you there.
They said goodbye to Rosemary and went to the Research Institute. Rosemary stared after them, somewhat amazed. At the Research Institute, Bessy actually took 3 days off for her wedding. Kai stared at the data in his hands, feeling his head throb. He was originally from the main experiment side and had helped Elijah while learning alongside him. However, Bessy had asked for a vacation. Even if she wasn't in the Research Institute, she would still remotely process the results. She was very intelligent, especially in mathematics and science. Even Mr. Rostron was willing to bow down to her, thinking that her talents had been bestowed from the heavens. Although Kai and the others privately complained that the music department's scholars also said the same thing about Bessy, he didn't dare say it in front of Mr. Rostron. Bessy had asked for no one to disturb her while she was on vacation for the past few days, which made Kai, Kara, and the others even busier. Bessy's job was indeed extremely difficult to do. Fortunately, 5 old professors and Luke had helped to support them.
Keep watching.
Mr. Rostron checked the time. It was time for the conference. He put down his phone and said,
I'm going to the conference now.
Today was the annual big conference of the 4 major research institutes. It wasn't just a problem with the resource allocation this year, but also about the replanning of the contribution system. Many people attended the conference. Each research institute had representatives from the middle and high levels. Seeing Mr. Rostron, Dean Soup, sitting on the delegation of the Science and Technology Department, stood up and greeted him. The Research Institute was now short of people, and Bessy had promoted Dean Soup. At the same time, for the sake of balance, she had also been promoted to the Dean of the Science and Technology Department next door. Most of the people in the Research Institute were convinced by her, but some with real talent still weren't. These people weren't on Director Fielder's side, so Bessy wasn't bothered either. Bessy arrived slowly there and also brought along Michael. When she arrived, she didn't listen to the resource allocation this year and only seemed drowsy instead. Michael was also famous in medical school. People on stage even praised him and Daniel for having developed the drug against the Y3 virus. Listening lazily to this, Michael wasn't very bothered. He lowered his head and helped Bessy to correct the mistakes in the manuscript. This session only lasted 2 hours. Bessy stood up only after it had finished.
Are we going home?
Michael kept the manuscript and asked. Bessy thought for a while and shook her head. She whispered, Mr. Rostron said that Kara and the others are having a bit of trouble. I'll go take a look.
Okay.
Michael would follow her anyway. They left.
Mr. Rostron, look at her. Is there anyone like her? The entire research institute is worrying about Plan B. I think we'll have to reconsider letting her be the successor,
said the old researcher in dissatisfaction. The moment he said this, most people remained silent. The old researcher was about to say something when an old man hurriedly ran up to him.
Mr. Crook, are you serious? You don't want Miss Miller? That's perfect. Our Computing Research Institute was just wondering why Miss Miller didn't enter our department. That's really great. Thank you.
Episode 565. Was getting married so troublesome?
No, how could it be? You must have heard wrong.
Dean Soup jumped when he saw the dean of the Computer Research Institute. He had already experienced Bessy being poached by the mathematics department when he was the president of Northwestern University. After that, he couldn't even survive the military training and had to face the situation of the Clark family snatching her. Hence, he was all too familiar with such circumstances. He immediately came forward upon hearing the dean of the Computing Research Institute.
Really?
The other party hesitated slightly. Dean Soup nodded solemnly.
Okay.
The other party finally looked away regretfully. Once he had left, Dean Soup turned sideways and looked at the old researcher. He sighed a little tiredly.
If she really leaves, our research institute will be left with no tears to cry.
The old researcher frowned and looked at Mr. Rostron.
What did they mean?
In his subconscious mind, he felt like Bessy would be considered a law-defying talent to have reached such a point at such a young age. But he didn't think she would easily leave the computer department.
Her affairs are no secret online. Bessy is the chief engineer of the Miller Corporation, and the Computer Research Institute holds her dear like a treasure.
Mr. Rostron glanced at him.
I also received a letter from Northwestern University 2 days ago. On the phone call from the dean of the music department, he nagged me for 5 minutes. Of course, if you really don't like it, Northwestern University's Research Institute would be glad to have her.
Northwestern University's music department's dean was a famous music fanatic. Everyone knew that. Bessy and Nico had well-known reputations in the music world. The dean thought she was born to walk on the music road. The old researcher was ignorant about all of this and was speechless. He had never worked with Bessy before. Although he had heard of Bessy's deeds, he always thought they had been exaggerated. Since then, everyone in the Research Institute knew that Bessy was highly sought after. Countless people outside were jealous of the Research Institute's big treasure. Even the old researcher also remained silent. Originally, because of the White family, the researcher had faced a lot of internal and external troubles. After all, Bessy's fame and achievements hadn't managed to shake the senior members. But now, it was only a matter of course. In the laboratory, Michael was leaning against the wall, flipping through literature and occasionally looking up at Bessy. Bessy didn't bother going to the lounge to change into a radiation-proof jacket today and stood next to Kara and the others while guiding the experiment. Michael looked away and continued reading the literature. Bessy had brought the upper part of this document to him before. Looking at the lower part, Michael discovered a lot of details. This year, the nuclear reaction in the Research Institute's Room 1 had failed. There had been 0 deaths and 3 injuries. At first, Claudius wanted to go to Northwestern University's Research Institute, but in the end, He was expelled from the city because of the explosion in the laboratory, during which Director Fielder's voice had been injured. There was no trace of what happened back then, but the explosive method. Michael tapped his fingers on the page. It was obviously the Schuler family's method. Claudius had left a reactor principle on the third underground floor of the laboratory. From then on, he had pried into the metal that inhibited the energy of the reactor, but he had never successfully performed this experiment. The Schuler family's methods were always vicious. Claudius probably knew the consequences. The crater civilization had surpassed this world for more than 100 years, and the Schuler family never would have expected Claudius to have penetrated the atomic layer long ago. While Michael was still thinking of this, Bessy had already returned. She squeezed her wrist and passed the new report in her hand to him. Putting the book back onto the shelf and taking the report, Michael asked,
"Tired?"
"I'm okay," Bessy said casually. Michael held the report in one hand and didn't turn it over. He wrapped his other arm around her waist and said thoughtfully,
"What do Jack and the others like?"
"Jack?" Bessy pressed the elevator button and paused for a moment before saying tentatively, "I don't know. Surfing the internet?" Ever since she appeared on the show with Zeke, Jack liked surfing the internet with his reading glasses. He had even become a member of her fan club. Tucker had told her all of this. Michael said thoughtfully,
"What about your uncle?"
He was referring to Zeke. Michael hadn't talked much to Zeke and Jack and was only familiar with James and Tucker, acting. As they entered the elevator, Bessy replied casually before turning to look at him. "Why are you asking this?"
"Madame."
Michael stared at her and said slowly,
"Did you forget that we're going to the Miller family the day after tomorrow?"
Bessy frowned. Was getting married so troublesome? Episode 566. Outside of Bessy's Life, Part 2. Brandon stayed at the Miller family's house for 2 days and didn't leave because he wanted to leave with Tucker.
"Where's James?"
He sat in the hall with Zeke and the others, looking out the door from time to time, waiting for Michael and Bessy. Brandon looked around but couldn't see James. Jack turned, looking complicated.
"James went to buy groceries."
At 5 a.m., James woke up and asked the servant to drive out. According to him, he had to go to the vegetable market to buy the fresh ingredients. The Miller family's chef had all the ingredients already. Jack actually disapproved of James going out to buy vegetables.
"Groceries?"
Clarence was stunned. Clarence had followed Brandon for so many years. The wedding 3 days ago was the first time he faced so many influential people, not to mention that even Matthew alone was enough for him to turn weak. He was even more shocked than when he had found that Bessy was an insider of the World Poker Tour. He returned to his senses these 2 days and mostly understood the Miller family's status in Fairfield. At this moment, when he heard that James, who was in charge of the Miller family, was shopping for groceries, he really felt it was perplexed.
"James has always had such a hobby."
Zeke laughed helplessly and glanced at Jack.
"Jack, when he comes back, don't nag him anymore. He doesn't even mention moving bricks anymore. It would be unjust to deprive him of this hobby too."
Jack reluctantly nodded.
"You make sense."
They were still talking when James returned, but he wasn't alone. A tall figure followed him, a foreigner who was about the same size as James.
"Kent, please sit down. By the way, do you have any allergies?"
James greeted him and let him go in. He first placed the ingredients in the kitchen and then took out an apron. Zeke, Brandon, and the others never expected that James would bring a friend back.
"James, this is..." "Zeke, This is Michael's friend from the wedding, Kent Reynolds.
James introduced him to Zeke and Brandon with a smile.
I just happened to see him when I was shopping for groceries. He also wants to settle down in Fairfield and buy a house. I invited him over for dinner.
Kent looked up. Too many people had been at the wedding. Brandon, Zeke, and the others had all been at the main table, while James, Michael, Rosemary, and the others had lined up for toasts behind. Brandon couldn't possibly recognize everyone at 100 tables. Like Clarence, his eyes had mainly been on Matthew and Giant Crocodile, and then on Michael and Bessy. This Kent probably had been sitting very far forward, so Brandon hadn't noticed him while focusing on Michael and Bessy. Brandon found him weirdly familiar, but couldn't figure out where he had seen him.
Kent, please have some tea. Michael and Bessy will be here soon.
James happily went to the kitchen after asking Kent's preferences. Although James had brought Kent back out of nowhere, both Zeke and Jack greeted him very respectfully.
Mr. Reynolds, I'm Bessy's uncle, Zeke.
Zeke introduced Kent to the others in the hall.
I just heard my brother say that you want to settle down in Fairfield?
Yes, Kent said in not very proficient English.
Fairfield has outstanding people. This city is very suitable for living.
It's good that you like our city.
Jack brought him back a cup of tea and smiled.
If you don't mind, I can show you around the city and help you pick a good area.
Jack felt like Bessy and Michael wouldn't be able to pay attention to poor Kent during this period of time.
Of course. Thank you, Jack.
Kent's eyes lit up. While they were talking, Clarence looked up at Kent from beside Brandon. He and Brandon exchanged glances, and finally, Brandon asked,
Mr. Reynolds, may I ask your real name?
Kent is short for Kenneth.
Kent answered casually while talking to Jack about his needs excitedly. Boom. Clarence slipped a little. He blankly looked at Brandon. What kind of weird species did their nephew belong to? How could he be Japan's mafia boss? Kent. Outside, Michael and Bessy returned with a car of gifts. Episode 569. Jealousy. Not far away, a black car slowly drove over. Michael got out of the driver's seat. Bessy called Mr. Rostron as she got out of the car. Mr. Rostron, I can't go today. I have to trouble you with the laboratory. She initially wanted to go to the laboratory in the afternoon, but after finding this out, she couldn't go anymore. Her experiment involved nuclear energy, and there were large amounts of radiation. The entire vicinity of the laboratory was relatively dangerous. This was one of the reasons why nuclear tests were conducted underground. It could be said that the researchers of the laboratory risked their lives every day when they conducted experiments. Considering her situation now, she definitely couldn't stay in the laboratory anymore. Bessy lowered her head and felt a little strange. She didn't think a day like this would come. Hearing this, Mr. Rostron put down the apparatus in his hand and pondered for a moment.
All right. Are you okay?
Bessy raised her head and said, I'm fine, so don't worry. I'll tell you about it later. It was a tense period in the laboratory. Naturally, she couldn't just leave randomly and should have formally requested time off. As she hung up the phone, Michael looked at her.
Have you applied for leave?
Yes. Bessy was a little annoyed. Dr. Clark couldn't keep his mouth shut, so the news spread very quickly. When they came out of the hospital, Michael kept receiving phone calls. They probably felt that Bessy would feel annoyed if her phone kept ringing. Even Zeke called him.
Miss Miller.
Their 5 confidants stood in a row at the door and greeted her respectfully. Marvin tried to size her up, but Bessy looked like she was about to fight him.
This is our aunt.
Christopher and the others stepped aside to introduce Bessy to Michael's aunt, who had just arrived at the villa.
Zeke came here today.
The news about Bessy's pregnancy gave life to the capital. Before Rosemary and the others arrived, Simon's already sent over a bunch of essential supplies. The Miller family wanted to move to the villa to live with Bessy very badly. The very second Zeke found out about it, he found someone to take care of Bessy in the Clark family. The two families didn't really have many reliable females. The only one was Rosemary, who was still single. Michael trusted the person Zeke recommended. He nodded at his aunt.
Aunt Rebecca, we will have to trouble you from now on.
Not at all, Aunt Rebecca quickly said. The Research Institute only found out about her pregnancy the next day as the responsible department received Bessy's report. Kara and Elijah almost blew Bessy's phone apart. If they weren't busy with their experiments, they would definitely have looked for her. Bessy and Michael had already moved back to the Highline apartments. The building was in a rural area and it wasn't conveniently located near the city. At this time, Bessy was sitting on the sofa downstairs. She put on her headphones casually and spoke with Kara and the others.
Bessy, if you're fine, please help me mentor the student's graduation thesis.
Elijah put down his experiment report, thought about it, and finally said to Bessy,
4 people.
Bessy couldn't go to the laboratory. Besides her and Mr. Rostron, the rest of the burden fell on Elijah. This semester, he also decided to mentor 4 thesis papers from graduates of Northwestern's computer science department. Bessy leaned on the sofa and played with the headphone cable in her hand. Is it appropriate? She hadn't graduated herself.
Of course.
Elijah smiled.
You're a 21-year-old ICNE champion and a second-level researcher. Do you know how many fans you have in the department? Dean Soup will definitely be assured if you grade the papers.
Bessy's current title in the Research Institute was a second-level researcher. It was absolutely appropriate to let her be responsible for the graduates. After Elijah finished speaking, he added Bessy into a discussion group that consisted of the 4 students he was taking care of. He told the students that their leading supervisor would be changed, handed the papers to Bessy, and continued with his own experiments. He let Bessy be in charge of the 4 students' thesis papers. Bessy had been quite free recently. Previously, she wanted to help Mary achieve the supreme level with 19 stars. But a high-level player supporting Mary was too obscene, so Bessy gave this task to Michael. As for Emmanuel, he had also silently retracted a few source codes. The 4 graduates started to approach her for guidance. Bessy became invested in their thesis papers. Michael quit most of his jobs as a medical researcher and spent most of the day with her at home. He spent the rest of his time approving documents. Today, he was in the study as usual. Bessy sat opposite him and read the papers of the 4 graduates. She had never been a patient person. After taking over the thesis papers of the graduates, she discovered that they had many problems. When she opened the first student's paper, Bessy couldn't help but press her temple with her hand. The problem she had pointed out had not been corrected yet.
Let me help you take a look.
As soon as she leaned back, Michael took the document from her. Look at this. They're all low-level mistakes that even a medical researcher like you are aware of. Bessy tapped the table with her fingers. They're too careless. I might as well play games with Mary. Hearing her words, Michael looked at her and smiled.
The computer is behind you. I'll take a look at these papers for you.
Although Michael didn't study physics, he helped Bessy with her experiments and calculated data for the past 2 years, so he knew a little. These thesis papers were also relevant to the research he helped Bessy with previously. He could definitely find out some problems. You can take a look at it first. I'll read them later. Bessy turned on her computer and asked Mary whether she wanted to play a game. Michael watched as she played her game and smiled. Aunt Rebecca brought over a bowl of soup. Seeing that Bessy was sitting in front of the computer, she wanted to say something, but Michael calmly interrupted her.
Aunt Rebecca, let her play. Give it to me.
All right, then. Aunt Rebecca handed the soup to Michael and gave him some instructions.
Michael, you must ensure that she eats all of it.
Michael nodded slightly. Aunt Rebecca looked a little worriedly at him before leaving. When she left, she couldn't help but glance at Michael and sigh. After staying in the villa for a few days, she started to understand their interactions more. She never advocated for Miss Miller to play computer games as they would affect her child. But since Mr. Clark was there, she compromised. Miss Miller was truly a winner in life for having such a wonderful man. Aunt Rebecca smiled. In the evening, Michael was still reading the papers for Bessy. Christopher and Patrick reported matters at the side. Michael listened to them and marked the thesis paper at the same time. He usually multitasked, so Christopher and Patrick were very used to it. Michael had already finished with 2 papers. After reading a third one, he placed it back and reread the second paper. As soon as he took it out and turned to the first page, a pink heart-shaped envelope fell out of the paper. The pink envelope fell to the ground. The words Lloyd Hoffman were written on it in black.
The markets.
Christopher stopped halfway in his report and looked at the love letter that fell from the table. He and Patrick stared at Michael silently. Based on Bessy's appearance and resume, it was normal for her to receive a love letter.
Go on.
Michael put the love letter in the drawer with a faint expression.
Okay.
Patrick immediately continued with his report. Michael dealt with many things today. When he returned to his room, he saw that Bessy wasn't asleep yet. She sat on the bedside with a blanket and flipped through a comic book calmly.
Why aren't you sleeping yet?
Michael placed his phone aside and leaned down to kiss her. Bessy's voice was a little vague. I slept in the afternoon.
Okay.
Michael whispered back.
I've already marked the papers for you. Should I tell them to pick up their papers tomorrow?
The Highline Apartments wasn't far from Northwestern University. Bessy hadn't been busy recently and initially wanted to send them over personally, but after hearing that, she didn't insist even though she hadn't been there for half a year. Half a year was enough for a person with no exposure to be forgotten online. However, many people at Northwestern University still knew her. Bessy was especially afraid of trouble, and it was also acceptable to ask the 4 of them to stop by the Highline Apartments. The next day at 7 a.m., the 4 students arrived on time. The 4 of them were all students from the Science and Technology Department at Northwestern University. There were many rumors about Zeke in Northwestern University, especially regarding Zeke's program. As the academy was kept a secret in the country, ordinary students didn't know much about Bessy's status in the research institute. Otherwise, Bertha's identity wouldn't have been kept confidential. The 4 students didn't expect Bessy to live in a place like the Highline Apartments. They rang the doorbell, and as soon as the door was opened, they saw a man wearing casual clothes. The man had sharp eyebrows and a polite disposition. When he saw the 4 of them, he gave way.
You must be Bessy's students. Come in.
The man was polite, but he seemed overbearing, so the 4 of them didn't dare to speak. Michael asked Marvin to pour tea for the 4 of them and then glanced upstairs with a smile.
She's still sleeping. I'll go and get her, so please wait a minute.
The 4 people, especially Lloyd sitting in the middle, didn't speak. Only Marvin said in a low voice to Patrick,
Didn't Michael already help Miss Miller mark the papers? Why did he still need for her to come down?
During this time, Michael didn't allow himself to wake Bessy up. As a result, his sleep time was delayed until 8 a.m. Hearing this, Patrick didn't say anything. He bowed his head and thought about the love letter that fell from the table last night. Could it be that he was triggered by that student named Lloyd? At the same time, in Devil City at Pinnacle Studios, a bespectacled woman looked at the man in front of her. "Editor Perez, are you going to report the name of the magic lamp again this year? You have to think carefully. If he still doesn't appear this time and doesn't update continuously, you don't have to think about being prompted in the next 5 years." Episode 570, an ongoing comic series. Pinnacle Studios was the most famous animation company in America. Editor Perez was the editor of the comics department of Pinnacle Studios. Several comic authors were under his name. A few years ago, an author under him named Magic Lamp created the masterpiece titled Celestial Wolf. Celestial Wolf was only published for a year, but the sales of the physical comics exceeded 3 million. It was an elite of the comics world. Many more were serialized online updates. At that time, IP wasn't as popular, so many film companies came to inquire about the film and television copyright of this comic. However, after the first part of Celestial Wolf was released, no one in the company could contact the author anymore. The second part didn't appear for a long time, and the enthusiasm didn't last. Those who inquired about the copyright issues also disappeared. Domestic comics were flourishing. At that time, Celestial Wolf was a viral hit, but now, all interest was lost. Furthermore, Pinnacle Studios had many impressive authors. Editor Perez became popular in Pinnacle Studios because of Magic Lamp. Every year, newcomers in Pinnacle Studios were nominated, and Editor Perez would always register Magic Lamp's map for 4 consecutive years. The other editors around him had already been promoted, but he was still in his original position as a small editor in the office. Editor Perez took out his phone and looked at Magic Lamp's profile on Twitter. After a long time, he said, "I'll wait." Seeing him like this, a woman stood up. She knew that Editor Perez wasn't only an editor, but also a fan of Magic Lamp. She shook her head. "Sure, you can continue to wait." She opened the door and walked out. Editor Perez continued to look at his phone in the office. He opened Twitter and sent a private message. "Magic Lamp, are you back?" 4 years had passed, and he asked this question every year. At the Miller family house in America, James and Zeke were at home. James was in the kitchen discussing what to eat with the chef. He didn't let other people go in and mess things up, but especially liked Michael's help. "Michael, come in and help me. The rest can't do it." Michael took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves unhurriedly, and glanced at Bessy. "You can talk to Uncle, and I'll go in and help." "Okay." Bessy sat on the sofa and answered slowly. Michael went in to help James with the food. Zeke put down the script in his hand and raised his eyes to look at Bessy. "Tucker wants you to remember to film with him." "I know." Bessy nodded. "Do you feel bored these days?" Seeing her like this, Zeke couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "I heard that Aunt Rebecca restricts your computer time. Do you want to go to Devil City?" "Devil City?" Bessy looked at Michael. "Noah's 3rd show episode will be in Devil City. You can ask Michael to look for him there." Zeke leaned back. He remembered that Bessy's wedding photos all disappeared the night after they were leaked on the internet. Bessy's current status was extraordinary, and many people were watching her. Zeke probably guessed what Alexander was doing and felt that it was related to Alexander. Bessy picked up her teacup and drank slowly. "It depends on the situation. When Pete is done with his final exams, I want to take him abroad." "Sure, Zeke nodded and continued to look at his script. Marvin strolled into the Miller family's living room and noticed the script in Zeke's hands.
The Realm of Gods? Do you know about this?
Zeke flipped to the next page and looked at him curiously.
I've been reading comics recently. The Realm of Gods is the hottest comic book right now. Is it going to become a movie?
Marvin asked him.
I'm still thinking about it. The director might not choose me when filming starts,
Zeke said faintly.
However, the author, Don't Ask the Heavens, is amazing.
He was a comic book master who had been famous for 10 years in America. The Realm of Gods had been translated into various languages and spread like wildfire all over the world. As the two talked, Bessy played a game on her phone without lifting her head. Marvin had also heard about this recently. When he heard Zeke talk about comics, he quickly said,
Do you all read comics? Let me introduce you to the comic Celestial Wolf. Even though it's short, it's very good. Sadly, the second part has never been released.
Not far away, the manager who brought over 2 cups of tea heard their conversation and glanced at Marvin with a smile.
Are you talking about Celestial Wolf? You might not have paid attention to the comics world before. At that time, the works by Celestial Wolf were extremely popular. The Realm of Gods cannot compare to Celestial Wolf. Unfortunately, no one knows how to contact Magic Lamp.
Speaking of this, the manager gritted his teeth.
What's wrong?
Marvin looked at him. The manager looked up and smiled elegantly as he said in a light tone,
I want to send him a blade.
Zeke explained.
He's a die-hard fan of Magic Lamp and has 3 special signed editions.
On the sofa, the quiet Bessy raised her eyebrow. On June 8th, Pete finished his final exams. On June 9th, Andrea invited Michael, Bessy, Luke, and the others to dinner. Luke was very busy now. After eating dinner, he had to rush back to the laboratory. The group wasn't worried about Pete's final exam results at all.
How was the difficulty of the final exams?
Michael reached out to peel a prawn for Bessy and asked Pete. Pete thought about it before replying.
It was a little difficult, especially geography.
Michael knew that the final exam questions were definitely difficult this year.
Can you get full marks for physics? If you can't, then you won last year's gold medal for nothing,
Luke said lightly. Bessy crossed her legs and glanced at Pete. I've read the questions yesterday. His total score should be 730 or higher.
A conservative estimate.
Pete nodded.
Around there.
Bam! At the end of the table, Marvin couldn't eat any more. Listening to this maddening conversation. After eating, Luke returned to the laboratory after learning about Pete's results. Andrea was busy in the kitchen. Someone knocked on the door outside. The noise was quite loud. Michael looked out and raised his eyebrow. Pete raised his eyebrow.
I'm going out for a while.
Bessy helped Tucker record a video while Michael stared outside thoughtfully. Outside, the same men in black were seen. The old man looked at Pete sternly.
Pete, I hope you can go back with me. Your grandpa is critically ill and wants to see you.
Pete glanced at him indifferently.
My grandpa died a long time ago.
After that, he slammed the door shut. The people outside continued to knock on the door. After closing the door, his face returned to his usual indifferent expression. Marvin, Michael, and Bessy had sensitive ears. They heard the conversation between the two of them. Michael looked at Bessy, pulled her over, and politely said,
Aunt, we're going out for a bit.
Andrea was standing by the kitchen door and holding a towel. She glanced at Pete, Bessy, and Michael before putting the towel on the table. After a long time, she said, Be careful on the way back. Andrea never liked to cause trouble for other people. Bessy and Michael didn't say anything more. The two of them returned to the Highline Apartments. Before Bessy looked for Jared and the others, Christopher received an encrypted file.
This is your aunt's business.
Michael handed the file to her.
It's a little complicated. Do you want to take a look?
Bessy thought of the bodyguards she saw at the school gate the previous time and opened it to take a look. She had investigated some things about Andrea before. At the start, there were still some people troubling Andrea, but Bessy only found that she was doing chemistry research for an organization. She didn't know that there would be some questions regarding Pete's background. Devil City. West family? Bessy squinted slightly after reading it. Marvin also leaned over to take a look. After reading it, she was silent for a while. No wonder he felt that Andrea was strange when he was in Chicago. She was as strange as Bertha, and it seemed that he was right.
I've only heard of two major families in Devil City, the Higgins family and the Marshall family. As for the West family,
Marvin shook his head.
I've never heard of them before. Michael, the person from the Northwestern Memorial Hospital is not really Pete's father. It turns out that his biological father died a long time ago. His grandpa is critically ill, so he wants Pete to go back and inherit the family.
Marvin admired Andrea a little for taking care of an unrelated vegetative person for 20 years. Michael didn't read the information. Hearing this, Marvin probably guessed what happened. He tapped the table with his fingertips.
Pete should go to Devil City.
He guessed that Andrea would let Pete pay his respects to his deceased father. Bessy thought so as well. Thinking about it, she sent a message to Noah via Twitter. Are you still in Devil City? After that, she called Andrea again. In a hotel in the capital, a butler dressed in black spoke to someone over the phone casually.
Yes, he just finished the final exams. I've already said that he would agree to return to the West family. Rest assured that we will bring him back as soon as possible.
On June 11th at 8 a.m. at the airport, the West family's butler was waiting at the ticket machine. Pete and the group walked over leisurely. The butler noticed that there were two others beside Pete and asked indifferently,
Pete, are these two here to send you off?